We've seen some umbrellas gone up again here. Kiyo Katayama's car, where we see umbrellas. We've seen on the other end of the grid, we've seen umbrellas go up, so it might even start to rain just a little bit, but the track virtually dry. It's just where you want to overtake, there you might have a problem because the track will be damp.
Yes, just off the main line, coming into any of the corners, and principally there only is, I believe, one realistic overtaking place, and that is into the Adelaide hairpin bend. If you're offline coming into it, probably you'll lock up the brakes, slide on through the corner, and well, we've seen what happened in Canada when you had a dry circuit and tried to pass down the inside when there was just the dust and the rubber on the circuit for Nigel Mansell. So I'm sure prudence will be the byword for most people, particularly on the first lap of this race.
Williams Renault, they lead the Constructors' Championship with a massive point advantage over McLaren. Honda, Benetton, Ford is in third place, then Ferrari in fourth, followed by Footwork, Mugen, Honda, Tyrrell, March, Dallara and Lotus. Ligier and Venturi both have 1 point. While we're looking at Nigel Mansell, the leader of the championship, he's got 56 points, which is twice the total of anyone else, and he's on pole position. Alongside Riccardo Patrese, Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger are on the second row, Michael Schumacher and Jean Alesi, and then we see the rest of the field, Brundle and Capelli, Thierry Boutsen and Eric Comas. Good to see the two Ligiers in the top 10. Mika Häkkinen and Johnny Herbert. The Lotus, the very happy Lotus drivers, Bertrand Gachot and Michele Alboreto, Aguri Suzuki and Gianni Morbidelli. Gianni Morbidelli in the only Minardi Lamborghini because Christian Fittipaldi went to hospital and got a cracked fifth vertebrae. JJ Leto, Kiyo Katayama, Andrea De Cesaris and Stefano Modena. Carl Wendlinger on the 11th row together with Olivier Grouillard, Gabriele Tarquini and Mauricio Guzumin, while the last row is Pierluigi Martini and Andrea Chiesa, another man who went very quick this morning. And just to finish off, Mansell leads Patrese by 28 points. Then it's Michael Schumacher, who's 2 points behind Riccardo Patrese. Gerhard Berger is fourth together with Ayrton Senna, and I think it's raining.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. We can't see it very clearly from where we're watching over the pits, over the start line, but it only takes that small drizzle to start falling, and all around the circuit, those black clouds we talked about earlier in the program, they're still there, they're still threatening. And well, you wouldn't have to be a genius to work out that there's a lot of rain in the sky, and all it needs is just, well, 5 minutes of rain, and that'll change the complete complexion of this Grand Prix. It will certainly create an opportunity for people like Ayrton Senna, who really have got nothing to lose, as opposed to people like Nigel Mansell, who are really trying to consolidate. Nigel wants desperately to get his 6th victory of the season. He's done all the work so far over the weekend. He's got his pole position, totally dominated qualifying once again. Stunning time of 1 minute 13.864. And that was some half a second quicker than teammate Riccardo Patrese. But you've got to go back into the 1 minute 15 second bracket before you get to Ayrton Senna. And really very, very disappointing and depressing for the McLaren team as they work absolutely flat out. But as I say, if it rains, it may well swing the pendulum of fate.
Of course, Nigel Mansell also, if he wins today, it's his 27th Grand Prix victory, which would equal the amount of Grand Prix victories by Jackie Stewart.
Well, regretfully, Jackie isn't here today. He may well be home in Switzerland watching Eurosport. He's a fan of Eurosport. He's told me on many occasions how much he's enjoyed watching the Grand Prix coverage that we provide. Well, Jackie, I'm sure if you're watching today and Nigel does equal your great total of 27 victories, you'll be a happy man for him, as much as Nigel is for himself and his team.
We're looking at the grid, the mechanics leaving the grid, and we're going to have the warm-up lap. And of course, I think John, if it starts to rain now, then it's not a wet race yet. I haven't seen any signs of being a wet race, so they might stop the race and then restart on wet weather tires. But it is threatening. Let's all hope it stays dry for the public's sake, for the driver's sake, for everybody's sake, I suppose, and have a very good race. 72 laps. Physically, not the hardest circuit there is on the calendar.
No, well, that situation, the race is, well, it doesn't have to be declared a dry race. It is a dry race. It is only if before the race starts there's sufficient water on the circuit for spray to be thrown up by the tyres, then it will be declared a wet race. But should it rain, then of course that's a different situation. And it may well be that the race will have to be red flagged if the conditions got to be too bad. And then you would see a two-part Grand Prix. But, well, let's hope that the weather does remain kind. Although I must say it still is extremely threatening overhead. But everybody's starting the Grand Prix on slick tyres. And in fact, there's enough ambient temperature right now to help that drying out process. Apart from the 26 cars covering the same part of the track, the ambient temperature will help accelerate that drying process. And as we've seen, in fact, over the weekend, when it was wet on Saturday morning, for example, even though there were damp patches on the track, cars were going very, very quickly indeed. So the only danger really is trying to pass, getting offline and hitting the brakes hard, locking a wheel, and then you're either getting dragged off into the sand traps or just simply spinning.
72 laps. We're on the warm-up lap here on Eurosport. The track, well, according to Martin Brundle, now completely dry. And there we look at Ayrton Senna. He's waiting for the red and green light to change. Here we go down. It's the back part of the circuit.
Yes, this is just coming down to the chicane.
I can't see any wet parts, John.
There's not. There's just that damp patch under the bridge, but that'll dry up very quickly. Well, the car is now coming down to take up their position on the grid. Nigel Mansell in pole position, slowing the grid down as much as possible to ensure that the time he sits on pole position is as short as possible. Always a very worrying time for the pole position winner.
The cars lining up on the grid. The two Williams on the front row, then the two McLarens. We have a Ferrari and a Benetton, then a Benetton and a Ferrari, the two Ligiers, then the two Lotus. Well, that's 6 teams in the top 12 this weekend, which is quite unusual. We're waiting for the red light to come on and then the green light. And then it's gone for 72 laps here around the Magny-Cours circuit, the Grand Prix de France. The green flag is waved, and we see the 5-second board. Then the red light will be on, and how quick will it change, and who will be first into that first corner? A very quick change from red to green, and who's got the best start?
Riccardo Patrese. Yes, indeed, Patrese definitely got the best start there. Nigel Mansell got caught, a lot of wheel spin, going sideways. But Riccardo Patrese got the leap into the first corner. The two McLarens 3rd and 4th, Benetton's 5th and 6th, Ferrari 7th and 8th, Lotus 9th, the two Ligiers 10th and 11th.
And a very good start from Riccardo Patrese. Maybe, John, you remember last year, the start of the race when Riccardo Patrese was on pole and just, well, fluffed the start.
And lots of action in the back. Oh, dear me. Schumacher and Berger. But behind that, my goodness, mayhem has gone on all through the field. We saw this coming in. We saw Schumacher and Berger. Well, Schumacher's trying to overtake Berger. But further behind, I can't say what broke loose, but let's look at it again from Schumacher's point of view. It was Ayrton Senna, it wasn't Gerhard Berger. Senna, well, that's an amazing result, really. So I'd like to look at that again, and a little bit more appraisal of what took place. Here we see it from the front. Michael Schumacher
sideways.
Well, Schumacher came out from behind Senna, tried to dive down the inside of Senna, but Senna's car on the left-hand part of the track. Schumacher looked to be at that point far enough ahead. Obviously wasn't, but just Senna pulled across the front of him. Now look behind you, one of the Venturi LaRousse cars. Here's another view of the situation. Senna getting clobbered from behind by Schumacher. Brundle getting through. Johnny Herbert, Capelli, the two Ligiers.
Well, after one lap, it's Riccardo Patrese leading Nigel Mansell by 1.1 seconds. Then it's Gerhard Berger. A man who took advantage of the situation was Martin Brundle, who is 4th. Then in 5th place, we've got Jean Alesi. In 6th, Mika Häkkinen. In 7th, Thierry Boutsen. 8th, Eric Comas. And then Johnny Herbert, who I think was very slow round the Estoril corner on the very first lap. Michele Alboreto in 11th, just in front of teammate Aguri Suzuki. and a lot of people got involved with that little skirmish, but Stefano Modenar's moved up to 17, so some people have lost some, other people have won again. But Riccardo Patrese leading Nigel Mansell, and Michael Schumacher in the pits, and Martin Brundle, who's out on the circuit. So maybe for this one Grand Prix the luck of Brundle is changing.
Yes, well, we all anticipated an exciting first lap. Well, that took my breath away, because really coming into that first Adelaide corner, one would have expected a little bit of caution from everybody, but Michael Schumacher thought he had the opportunity to go down the inside. Ayrton Senna felt that it was his corner. The two cars collided, and now we see, well, the pace car, well, that was the pace car that had been on the circuit just getting back in. Michael Schumacher now rejoining, and Ayrton Senna absolutely gutted, standing beside his McLaren. This is not the result he was looking for, and really Nigel Mansell, running in second place, will have to capitalize to maximum effect. He must at some point take the lead in this race, whether it's by team orders or whether he just plainly drives past Riccardo Patrese, I don't know. But here is the opportunity for Mansell to further lock out the 1992 championship in his favor.
Riccardo Patrese's lead was cut down to 0.8 of a second on that very first, or the second lap. We're on lap 3 out of 72. Gerhard Berger just stays with Gerhard Berger, and then there's a little gap to Martin Brundle, who was very happy with the car on full tanks, but can't keep up.
Well, I thought something happened to Mansell's car coming through that chicane at the back of the circuit. It appears to me he's dropping back away from teammate Riccardo Patrese.
I was going to say he's coming in, but he's not. He just pointed his car in the direction, and you're right, because the gap is gone to 2 seconds, and Gerhard Berger is closed right up. Mansell lost over a second, and someone spun there on the second or third lap. Yellow flags being waved. Michael Schumacher being back into the race, but he is a lap down. He's got to carve his way back to the front, which is not an easy task indeed.
No, well, it was strange, because we watched the two Williams come through the middle part of the circuit. There appeared to be sparks flash from the bottom of Mansell's car, and at that point he seemed to lose momentum. And also Gerhard Berger then rapidly closed up. It was just coming through this section of circuit here, we saw suddenly a big flash from underneath the car. Berger running some second and a half behind Nigel Mansell. Martin Brundle a further second and a half, and now you can see on the helicopter shots that is rain on the lens of the camera. Now we can't see rain falling on the circuit, but people are beginning to put in front of us on the other side of the track hats, jackets, overalls, anything they have to keep themselves dry, umbrellas going up. So there is a small amount of rain beginning to fall, and we're just on the fourth lap,
in which Riccardo Patrese leads his teammate Nigel Mansell by an increase in margin. No, a margin that's very much smaller now. 1.4 seconds, 2.1 second behind that is Gerhard Berger. Then it's Martin Brundle. Brundle said yesterday, I'm going to start nice and easy. We talked to Tom Walkinshaw about it. How are you going to get past those cars in front of you? Well, he did by taking each other out.
Well, that certainly has helped Martin Brundle's cause, but it hasn't done very much for teammate Michael Schumacher. In the meantime, Nigel Mansell has got it all back together again. Whatever that little difficulty he had some 2 laps ago isn't a major problem, and now beginning to close in on Riccardo Patrese. Well, we're not getting rain on the lens of these cameras around the circuit.
Well, they're getting rain on the umbrellas we see in the grandstand right opposite us, so I think we can safely say there is some water falling out of the skies here over Magny-Cours. Look on the lens here, we can definitely see rain, and the question is, who is going to stop for wet weather tyres? I think this, John, is even worse than trying to find a time to change from wet weather tyres to slicks, because you might come in now, change tyres, and the rain might go away again.
Yes, well, in this situation, I would keep a car out as long as possible, because you never know precisely what the amount of water that's going to fall is. And also it was in these conditions anyway that yesterday Mansell was just so impressive when he went out at the end of that morning session, the unofficial session. The track was barely dry, certainly not as dry as it is now. He was very, very quick indeed. And really Riccardo Patrese must be aware of. Look at the gap now between Mansell and Gerhard Berger, something like 3.5 seconds in the space of just over a lap and a half.
Well, they're a second a lap quicker than anybody else. Mansell's fastest race lap at the moment, 1:20.006, and then after that we've got Riccardo Patrese on a 1:20.590, but the rest of the drivers are all in the 21 and 22, and Mauricio Gugelmin is walking back to the pits. Well, that's another disappointing race for the Brazilian.
Yes, well, I think that Mauricio Gugelmin's car was one of the cars involved in that faux pas on the first lap in the Adelaide hairpin. We saw cars right at the back of the field suddenly going every direction. One of them was a Jordan Yamaha, and I think that was the car of Mauricio Gugelmin. Stefano Modena, his teammate, of course, still in 17th place. So another disappointing day indeed for the Cecil Jordan Yamaha team, on top of which they've lost all the engines that were en route, stuck in that traffic jam at Fontainebleau in the truck driver strike.
Riccardo Patrese getting on the pit board revs. I don't know what that means, but I suppose, guys, look after it, slow down. You're a second quicker than anybody else, although Gerhard Berger now settled into the 120s. But I think if you really push the Williams cars, they can easily get into the 119s. And here we see, after 6 laps on the caption, Riccardo Patrese leads Nigel Mansell, Gerhard Berger and Martin Brundle. John Lazy is in 5th and Mika Häkkinen is in 6th place.
Well, I think that sign for revs was an indication to Riccardo Patrese to watch his revs. Of course, the team are aware in the pits with the telemetry exactly what is going on.
But he still leads the race. We're on lap 7 out of 72. Join us after the break here live on Eurosport for the Grand Prix of France at Magny-Cours.
Suspension arrangement which enabled Jean Alesi to qualify 6th on the grid, but they are still off the pace of the Williams, the McLarens and the Benettons. But of course the Williams have got a pace all of their own. And if there's one race that the Williams-Renault team want to win more than any other, it is the French Grand Prix. This one, we're with Schumacher now, who is trying to make his way up through the field. And Michael Schumacher in the Benetton Ford is still in 22nd place, 1 lap behind, but starting to catch and pass people. And the reason, of course, that Williams-Renault, underlining the Renault bit, want to win the French Grand Prix is the fairly obvious reason that Magny-Cours and the French Grand Prix are the home Grand Prix circuit and race of the French Renault organisation, which they won last year, Nigel Mansell. And that is Gabriele Tarquini's Fond Metal. That makes the 3rd retirement so far, because Tarquini in the new GR02 Fond Metal Ford is out. Excellent car, very good looking car, good performance, but still a lot of development to do. And Michael Schumacher has got ahead of him now. It looks to me like one of the Dallaras, so that'll be either Pierluigi Martini or JJ Leto. No, it isn't. It's one of the Ferraris, I apologise. So I would deduce that it is Ivan Capelli. But that is a deduction.
With Michael Schumacher on the 8th lap out of 72, the Grand Prix de France here in Magny-Cours, which is still led by Riccardo Patrese, who's just done a 1:19.816. The gap with teammate Nigel Mansell is 1.1 seconds. Then it's Gerhard Berger, Martin Brundle, Jean Alesi, Mika Häkkinen, Jerry Boutsen, Eric Comas and Johnny Herbert, while Ivan Capelli rounds up the top 10.
Yes, and of course Michael Schumacher a lap down in Ivan Capelli. He's now back on the circuit, having had a new nose fitted to his Benetton Ford, having managed to nick the nose off the car when he collided with Ayrton Senna. And really, that I have to say, Michael Schumacher now squeezing past Ivan Capelli, and he's got through well. He got through cleanly, and that's an ideal pass. That was a good overtaking maneuver. It's just a shame that he wasn't quite able to do the same thing with Ayrton Senna on the opening lap of this race. But presently Michael Schumacher down. Let me have a look at the positions.
Well, he's in
back
22nd.
Yep.
22nd position. We've got 4 retirements altogether: Ayrton Senna, Mauricio Gugelmin, Gabriele Tarquini and Andrea Chiesa. So after a good showing this morning, both the Fond Metal cars out of the race in a very early stage. Riccardo Patrese completing 9 laps Nigel Mansell 1.2 seconds behind him. Then it's Gerhard Berger, Martin Brundle. They run together. Jean Alesi, Mika Hakkinen, who can keep up the pace very well. The two Ligiers, Johnny Herbert, and then we should have Michael Schumacher a lap down, and Ivan Capelli, who you were just riding with now. And Ayrton Senna, we just had a quick look at him. He doesn't look a happy man, John.
No, just dejected, I would say, is the word. It obviously was not part of the game plan to have Senna out of the race within half a lap of its start. Well, that's one of the risks of these early laps in a Grand Prix. But it was a little imprudent, to say the least, of Michael Schumacher to think that he could take advantage of Ayrton Senna under brakes, under those conditions. And really, Schumacher left himself really no chance, no exit point. In other words, having made the commitment, he was totally committed, but he wasn't far enough alongside Senna to believe he could take the corner. But looking at the Williams pits, Riccardo Patrese is getting a signal from the pit wall saying fuel 4. And that means it's an adjustment, it's a mixture adjustment that the driver has. Now, whether this is they want the engine to run richer or leaner, we don't quite know how the Renault engineers work that out. But throughout the race, it is quite common to have a team advise a driver run the engine more rich or less rich, whichever the case may be. We've also seen Riccardo Patrese given a signal from his pits to say revs. Mansell not getting the same information, or not requiring the same information. But Mansell now closing down yet again on Riccardo Patrese. They've got Olivier Grillard just ahead of them in the Tyrrell. And this is, I'm sure, an opportunity for Mansell, since he is probably the greatest opportunist when it comes to overtaking in Formula One today. But Patrese, clever enough to know not to let himself get too close to Grillard at this point of the circuit. He doesn't want to run up behind him. He doesn't want to lose his momentum. So a little game of cat and mouse between the two Williams drivers, both anxious to make best advantage of the Grille Tyrrell. And you can see now the gap is closing, but this is the point where they need to be cautious. This is the point where Mansell is thinking, where can I take advantage? Well, if I get out of this chicane cleanly, then out of the corner onto the start-finish straight, don't get too close to Patrese going through the long Estoril corner. I might just get that mega toe all the way down the straight and then pop out coming into the Adelaide hairpin. Can Mansell play out that game plan? Well, let's watch it and see. Look how quickly he closed up in the second part of the corner.
Well, we lost Gerhard Berger, John. Gerhard Berger is gone. It's now Martin Brundle in third place. And I haven't seen it on screen, but I just haven't seen him come into the pits and right above his pits, while Riccardo Patrese goes past Olivier Grillard, who also lets Nigel Mansell pass. And
there's the reason.
He blown up engine, I think.
Yeah, very blown up engine. Again, the luckless Gerhard Berger. He won the Grand Prix in Canada 3 weeks ago. And another disappointment for Berger. Looks to be one of the few blow-ups we've seen recently from the Honda engine. But that one certainly is terminal. And, well, here we see Gerhard Berger just pulling off oil coming from the left-hand side. In fact, it's coming from all round. That's just the corner, the final corner, the water corner, as we call it. And Ron Dennis now completely, well, I have to say, dejected.
Well, both cars are out of the race, that's for sure. So no points for the Marlboro McLaren team here. And Riccardo Patrese completing lap 12 out of 72 with, well, you can see the gap he's got with teammate Nigel Mansell. And the fifth retirement of this race is Gerhard Berger, by the way. Martin Brundle now on his own, driving around in the low 20s. Jean Alesi in the high 20s. Mika Hakkinen doing exactly the same time as Jean Alesi. Thierry Boutsen in the points, Ligier in the points. Then 7th Eric Comas, 8th is Johnny Herbert, 9th Ivan Capelli, and we've got to wait a long time for the man in 10th place, but it is Michele Alboreto.
Yes, well, here we have Mansell chasing Riccardo Patrese, and it's very clear that Mansell is much quicker through that double left-hand corner after the start-finish straight than teammate Patrese is through this section of circuit, more or less even Stevens. Mansell really just biding his time, waiting till he's got that gap absolutely ideal. And then you'll see another, I believe, perfect Mansell overtaking the manoeuvre. But of course, Riccardo Patrese, first time he's had the lead in a race since the Brazilian Grand Prix back in March. And really, he's not going to want to concede that lead unless there are team orders from the pits saying Riccardo Patrese P2. Let's just see how quickly Mansell closes up as he exits the second part of the left-hander, coming into the right, the long right Estoril corner. Now Mansell, I thought, was just getting into position there to come up behind Patrese, and we cut to Jean Alesi. Alesi currently in fourth, and Mika Häkkinen behind him. The first of the two Lotuses doing a very, very impressive job indeed.
Well, it sounds quite good to see this battle, I must say, because Ferrari and Lotus, both great names from the past and, well, becoming great names from recent years as well. I mean, Lotus and Ferrari, the two most successful teams in Formula 1 history.
Well, they're certainly two of the most charismatic names. Ferrari are the most successful team historically, but McLaren is the team that's most likely going to dethrone them from that position. But today is not going to be one of those days. Both the McLarens out. Ayrton Senna, of course, on the first lap, punted out by Michael Schumacher. And then on the 11th lap, we saw Gerhard Berger's car smoking away with a blown up engine. So very, very sad day, bad day for McLaren, and also, I must say, a bad day for the championship.
We just saw the top 6 on our screen, and after 14 laps, the 14th lap just completed by Riccardo Patrese and Nigel Mansell. Mansell being a little quicker than Riccardo, but the gap half a second. Then it's Martin Brundle, 11 seconds behind Jean Alesi and Mika Häkkinen. We can see what the gap is there. Boutsen and Comas, Johnny Herbert, they're all running together. And then there is that big gap again to Capelli and Michele Alboreto.
Well, Mika Häkkinen is closing down on Jean Alesi, and look, coming down the long straight, he's getting closer. He's picking up the toe from the back of the Ferrari. I don't think he's close enough behind. He's certainly having a look. No, he decided not to do it this time. But I tell you what, he's sending out signals to Jean Alesi that I'm about to pass you, my son, and don't do anything to stop me.
Mika Häkkinen, very good on 4 wheels, as we can see. We saw him this morning coming to the Lotus Motorhome on 1 wheel. No, he didn't drive him off the car. And there, Riccardo Patrese, he didn't lose the lead. No, Nigel Mansell had a look, but Riccardo, unimpressed, didn't even try to close the door, just knew where Mansell was and that there wasn't a chance in the world that he was going to concede that first place.
Well, Mansell now closer yet again, coming across the start-finish line. Gabriele Tarquini walking back to the pits. And again, you see how much Mansell closes up. The trick is to get himself sufficiently close to Patrese here, but not to get too close to lose the downforce. Now, I believe, ideally placed. Will Patrese weave around in the straight and let Mansell take the lead? Mansell going down the left-hand side, but is Patrese going to concede? No, he's not. Well, I just wonder what's going on now. Mads taking advantage.
They're making a race of it.
Touch. Dear me, Riccardo Patrese, what are you doing? Well, I have to say, Frank Williams was watching this, and I hope he is. He ought to be sending out messages to both his drivers and say, for goodness sake, we're here to win the race.
Well, that's what they both will probably say to Frank Williams as well, John.
Well, they may well think that. Look at Frank now, sitting in the pits. I'm sure there's a few lumps in his throat. That was a very, very, well, let's call it, I can't think of the word I want to say, but dramatic moment indeed. Patrese refusing to concede the lead in this Grand Prix to teammate Nigel Mansell. Mansell now dropping back a little bit, giving himself a bit of time to gather his breath, regather the momentum. And they certainly made it blatantly clear that Riccardo Patrese is not going to hand him the lead in this race. So it seems that Nigel Mansell is going to have to battle with his teammate as much as he's battled with everybody else this year.
Well, and no team orders, that's for sure, in the Williams team so far. I must say, very good driving from Nigel Mansell, who could have stayed where he was, I suppose, and it's wet.
It is wet. You can see now there's the beginnings of spray coming off the wheels. It was just faint as they came down the straight. The straight, that part of the circuit, the far part of the circuit, now umbrellas. And the pits going up again. They were taken down some 10 or 15 minutes ago, now going back up again. and it is clear that there is loose water on the back side of the circuit, and Mansell again, you can see, slowing down even more than we've seen in previous laps.
Well, Mansell, John, I think he could have stayed where he was on that lap with Patrese with that little bash, but he backed out of it, and otherwise he could have had a shunt. And well, we've just been pointed out on the computer here, Mika Häkkinen has overtaken Jean Alesi. So we've now got Lotus in 4th, a Ferrari in 5th place, and here we're with Jean Alesi. Well, and maybe Jean, with his spectacular driving style, just got caught out that little bit, John.
I think it's also the start-up weight of the Ferrari is that much higher than that of the Lotus. The Lotus, like the Benetton, of course, has got the advantage of the Ford HB engine, and that means, as Tom Walkinshaw explained, they've got a lower race start weight, and of course, in terms of acceleration, a great advantage. Now, look at that from Alesi's car. You can see how much moisture there is in the circuit. Now, Mika Häkkinen almost losing it. Jean Alesi likewise. The circuit beginning to become very, very slick indeed. It's not wet enough for wet tyres to work, but you've got to be absolutely very careful indeed, because at any point now, and look at Alesi now trying to take advantage of experience, his Formula 1 experience over that of Mika Häkkinen. Häkkinen much more cautious coming through the long Estoril corner, and I think Jean Alesi is going to try and pop down the inside. Now again, look, the spray, you can see it coming up clearly off the wheels of these cars. Alesi coming up alongside. Is he going to get through? Ooh,
no way, says Mika Häkkinen.
No, well, it did sort of carry out what I thought may well happen. Alesi now again showing the signs of or static yellow and red flag. That indicates not oil as is normal, but wet track. Alesi going the long way around.
Well, he's got to go around
180-degree corner. They've got to get past one of the tail enders here. Of course, Mika Häkkinen also thinking the same thing. And Alesi going left to right. But really, so difficult in these conditions. You've got to be so careful with the throttle. Too much throttle at the wrong time. And again, it's our friend Olivier Grillard. Grillard, of course, sponsored by Eurosport for this Grand Prix. And he is well aware that I'm here watching every move he makes. Alesi coming down the inside, squeezing through. Oh, Jean! Oh dear, you are a brave little chap, aren't you?
Well, he's captured 4th place back from Johnny Herbert, that's for sure. Mika Häkkinen.
And I have to say, I think it was quite intelligent of Häkkinen not to try and resist Jean Alesi. He recognised the forcefulness of Alesi in these very difficult conditions, and he allowed Alesi to get through at a very, very tight part of the circuit.
Lap times have dropped to the high 20s, low 30s, and Riccardo Patrese leads Nigel Mansell by 0.9 of a second. That's been there for a very long time. They're both in the 29s, and all the rest are over the 130, John.
Yes, well, these two are having a mighty race between the two of themselves.
Patrese leads Nigel Mansell. We'll be back after the break with more action from Magny-Cours.
Have to come in and change tyres. The question is, will they decide to stop the race? But now, as you can see, slithering and sliding, going through to complete the lap. Patrese leads. They're coming up to Andrea De Cesaris now in the Tyrrell to lap him. They're being followed by the Jordan of Stefano Modena, and they, of course, are race leader Riccardo Patrese on lap 20 out of 72, and Nigel Mansell in 2nd place behind him. And what the worry in the Williams team will be, of course, is that in their enthusiasm to lead, Riccardo Patrese and Nigel Mansell might take each other out. They are both enormously experienced drivers, but and Mansell's going for it. He's seen his opportunity. He comes up right behind the gearbox of Riccardo Patrese. They pass JJ Lehto's Dallara.
Now, this is tremendous stuff. One just hopes that the race doesn't get stopped if the rain holds off now. With a bit of luck, the organisers may decide not to stop it, and it's a real shame about this rain rule, because Mansell had his opportunity.
Jonathan.
And the red flag is out. The race is being stopped. The red flags are out.
On lap 20, and there's the reason you saw the Tyrrell slide wide there. So the French Grand Prix is stopped on lap 20 out of 72. Now, this means to say that the race will be run in two parts. You can see the race, you can see the rain pouring down on the circuit, and a lot of quite complicated rules come into play now, because if the race has done more than 2 laps and less than 75 laps, which is 54, that means to say that the race will be restarted. And
coming down more and more. Riccardo Patrese was leading Nigel Mansell by a long way. I must say, it wasn't a long way. It was 0.9 of a second. Then there was a long gap to Martin Brundle, Jean Alesi, Mika Häkkinen, Thierry Boutsen and Eric Comas and Johnny Herbert. But John, the rain is just too much rain at the moment to be out on slicks.
Yes, the regulations state that once spray is coming from the rear tyres of the cars, then they must stop the race. The race was a dry race. In those circumstances, it is
the red flag coming out. That is when the clocks will have stopped and where the race order and the race times will be taken from. This is now Parc Fermé on the grid. Nobody's allowed to touch the cars other than to change to wets. If it's declared a wet race, they'll be able to do that, but they cannot work on the cars. And the second heat will then, the time for that will be added together, so we will be looking at a total overall elapsed race time.
And I should tell you that this situation is a commentator's nightmare, because we have to bear in mind not only the positions before the race was stopped, but the differences between the contestants. If you've got a pencil and paper handy, you might like to make a note of the fact that on lap 20, Riccardo Patrese was 1.1 seconds ahead of Nigel Mansell, who was 27 seconds ahead of Martin Brundle, who was 9/10 of a second ahead of Jean Alesi in 4th position, who was 7 seconds ahead of Mika Häkkinen, 5th, who dropped back. Now here's a replay of Ayrton Senna on the first lap being nerfed by Michael Schumacher and spinning out, and you can see, I hadn't realised that there was another crash on the approach to the Adelaide hairpin, and all I can tell you, so it's Wendlinger, I think, spinning out. Yeah, that's the march. There's only one of them because Paul Belmondo failed to qualify, and Carl Wendlinger had a nasty crash yesterday and was actually helicoptered off to hospital for a very thorough check, which proved to be okay and was allowed to start the race. But I had missed the fact because I was concentrating on Senna and Schumacher, and here is the replay of that Wendlinger too was involved and out of the race.
Yes, and most certainly that was Schumacher's fault, that accident, because apart from anything else, you see on the replay here, he had nowhere to go. Senna was right up on Berger, and there was no hole for Schumacher to slot himself into. And that was the impetuosity of youth, and he was learning all the time, and he remains a quite outstanding talent. And you saw the coming together on the straight behind. There was all hell let loose there, bits and pieces flying everywhere, lots of contact, but not too much damage, fortunately. So now we see from Schumacher's car. Now he's going inside Senna. Senna turns into the corner because he's not alongside him. He's only along with his back wheel, and boom. And there it is. So Schumacher working hard to hold it all together. Now, cars on the grid. All under the eye of the scrutineers, and there will probably be a discussion now because they will allow wets to be changed. And it may be that because at the discretion of the organisers, I believe, they could allow the cars to be moved onto wet settings, because although not necessarily will the teams want to do that. That wet settings, by that I mean as well as for a full wet race, what they do is obviously they try and increase the grip, so they soften the suspension for wet tyres if they think the race is going to remain, if the track is going to remain wet for the rest of the race. And in today's circumstances, I'm sure it won't. They'll expect it to dry out. but they would soften the suspension, put maximum wing on, and various other changes with the shock absorbers. Jonathan has news from the pits.
Well, of course, things down here in the McLaren pit are really very subdued. It's been a very, very disappointing race for them, the worst for a long, long time. They're all packing up, of course, because they can't get back in the race. But meanwhile, the rest of the teams, well, those who are still running, are going to be looking at the cars, changing the tyres and preparing again and getting themselves psychologically prepared for a second crack. And, of course, that's not easy, James, is it?
Well, sorry, Jonathan, it's me. I just wanted to let everybody know that after 19 laps, and remember this was stopped on lap 20, Riccardo Patrese, and this is absolutely critical, was 0.789 seconds ahead of Nigel Mansell, and Martin Brundle was 24 seconds behind, and things are changing all the time. We're getting new readouts on our positions, so I'm going to take a deep breath, tell you that Thierry Boutsen is busy cleaning his visor there, the Belgian who drove for the Williams team and won 3 races for them before he went to Ligier, since when, sadly for him, his career has taken a downward path. But the standings are changing all the time. Indeed, as the cars assemble on the grid now, there's a lot of clarification to be made. But all that we can tell you for sure is that the crowd is braving some pretty unpleasant weather conditions. Windy, very wet indeed. And there you see the famous prancing horse. And down on the grid, everybody getting ready. It's always a confusing time at this point during a race. What is totally confusing me at the present moment is that we're getting a succession of alternative readouts. Now, I think this is the right one. I'm ignoring the one which was saying that Martin Brundle was in front when the race finished, because I know he wasn't. And after 18 laps, now are you with me? After 18 laps, which is the penultimate lap before the lap that the race was finished on, or the first part of the race was finished on, Riccardo Patrese led Nigel Mansell by 0.9 seconds. In third position, it was Martin Brundle, who was 21.9 seconds behind Mansell. In fourth position, it was the French Sicilian, Jean Alesi, in the Ferrari, 31.125 seconds. You're seeing this on your caption now. And in sixth position was, in fifth position, it was Mika Häkkinen's Lotus, ahead of Jean Alesi's Ferrari. And Häkkinen was 31 seconds behind Alesi, and Boutsen was 36 seconds behind Häkkinen. So things were very spread out indeed. And what that means, effectively, is that the race is very much still between Riccardo Patrese and Nigel Mansell. Less than a second between them. So what Mansell has to aim to do, and this is Ivan Capelli's Ferrari being wheeled backwards, and as you can see, it is on slick tyres for dry weather conditions. What Nigel Mansell has to do, or try to do, when the race restarts, is to get an absolute flyer of a start, which is what Patrese did last time, get ahead of the Italian and lead him by more than a second when the race finishes. If he does so, he will win on aggregate. But let's consider what else happened that was interesting and dramatic. Well, obviously, interesting and dramatic are the fact that out of the race went both the McLarens, and there is one of them being brought in, with Ayrton Senna out on the first lap, with Gerhard Berger out subsequently. An absolutely terrible race for the Woking team. They'll be on their way home. Incidentally, the Brabham team, who failed to qualify for this race and who left the Magny-Cours circuit last night, have already got their cars back in Milton Keynes, which is very good news for the other teams who are going to have to leave France tonight and try to get back to England tomorrow, because remember, the British Grand Prix at Silverstone is next Sunday. There is only a week between these races, which is what normally happens. And there is the Goodyear technician measuring the tread depth of that slick tyre. And one of the stars in this race already, 8th position at the end of that 20 laps, was Johnny Herbert, and he's with Jonathan Palmer now.
Johnny, it looked as if things were getting pretty tricky there towards the end before the red flags come out. Just how much grip was there?
I suppose it was almost zero. It's getting very tricky, especially on the high stuff, because earlier on when it started, it kept actually raining in different parts of the circuit. I think it started down here, then it moved around, then it was everywhere, but it was very, very slippery, yeah.
Was the track dry, in fact, from the word go, or was it still damp at the start?
No, it was dry from the start, and it wasn't a problem until it started again.
And do you think the red flag came out at the right time? It's always a difficult issue, isn't it?
Well, in a way, probably from the safety side of it, I would probably say yes, because I say the weather's a bit iffy anyway at the moment. The conditions weren't totally bad for slicks. We did have some grip, so it could have gone on possibly a little bit longer. But that's all.
Now that I know that you as a team had some problems with the active suspension car yesterday, I gather that Mika Häkkinen was back to a passive setup. What sort of setups are you running here today?
Well, we're back to the passive at the moment. We've sort of just taken a safe journey at the moment that we can get to the end of the race, so we don't want any silly little problems. So.
Thanks, Johnny. We wish you well.
Jonathan, one thing that, of course, is going to be a big decision now for these drivers, the circuit having had a nice little soaking, but the rain now holding off, is whether they feel they need to start on wet tyres or whether they'll feel it's dried out and just start on slicks. Maybe you could have a suss out while you're down there and see what the general feeling is.
No, I'll certainly do that, James, and I was thinking the very same point myself, that now the rain has stopped, the atmosphere is pretty warm, it must be 20 degrees here with the odd little bit rays of sun just peeping through, and I wouldn't be surprised if many do decide to start back on slicks.
I would have to say that would be, my guess now would be that would be the right choice. As you say, it's warm, there's still going to be, they haven't, have they started the countdown yet? We can't see from where we are.
I'm not sure whether they have or not either.
They'll start it with a 5-minute board, I believe.
In that case, it definitely hasn't started. At the moment, we've got the Ferrari of Alesi still on slick tyres. We've got 10 minutes to go, James. The 10-minute board has just come up. I just tried to have a word with Michael Schumacher after that incident. He didn't feel inclined to have a word. So
what a surprise!
That's just what I thought too. I think he knows when he's guilty.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've had a look at the replay several times. I mean, the initial reaction was that he was guilty, and the replay has really confirmed that, because amongst other things, Senna, as they went into the corner, was right on Gerhard Berger's gearbox. Not so much to cause the damage that it subsequently suffered, but right up against it. And there was literally no hole for Schumacher to slot into. He'd set off for somewhere where there was nowhere to go. But as far as the slicks are concerned, 10 minutes more of drying on the track. I'm sure that in a couple of laps the circuit will be cleaned up. What water there is will be spread. There is a picture of a puddle, but I think that's in the an exception rather than a rule. Well, tyres off Boots and Ligier. Some blanketed tyres going on it. I suspect they're wet. Anyway, I'll let you're down there, Jonathan.
Yes, we've got Mansell's car. They've got the slicks on the car still. They've been having a look at it, taking off the engine cover. I think just as a precautionary measure, though. We've got most cars staying on slicks at the moment, and I think probably, as we are suspecting, they're going to feel too that come the start in what's now must be about 9 minutes' time, that slicks will be the right thing to do.
Yeah, I'm sure. Unless we get more rain. How are the clouds looking?
Well, I would say I'd vote at the moment of going on slicks looking at the clouds. They really are quite light. Those heavy grey clouds that we had prior to the start of the race, or the original start to the race, they've gone. But I think that it's difficult to say, but I think I would opt for slicks.
Well, as you look at Riccardo Patrese there waiting to restart, I can tell you that Ayrton Senna, now in mufti, in civilian clothes, out of his overalls, has swarmed over the wall and gone to Michael Schumacher's car and had a word or two or three or four with the German, who is still comparatively new to Grand Prix racing, good as he is, 23 years old, and this is only his 14th Grand Prix, and is looking, or was looking, suitably chastened. Now, when the race restarts at 14:52 our time, which will be, I think, 13:52 your time, Riccardo Patrese is going to be in pole position, because the grid will be in the order in which the first part finished. So Patrese in pole position, Mansell second, and then on the second row, the Benetton of Brundle and de Lacy. The third row will be Häkkinen and Boutsen. The seventh row, Comas and Johnny Herbert. So both fourth row, both the Lotuses in the top 4 rows. And Michael Schumacher right at the back, and that is Martin Brundle, sitting in his Benetton, waiting to start and talking to Jonathan Palmer.
And
Martin, you must have been slightly disappointed to have that race stopped. I should think you looked at a very solid third place there. Just what was your own feeling on the stoppage and actually when it happened?
Well, I feel in a pretty solid third place now, Jonathan, to be honest. I'm starting the next race third. It was getting a little bit treacherous out there. Your destiny was a little bit out of your control, I think. I think they stopped it at exactly the right time, quite frankly.
Now, what about the Schumacher incident? We need to ask you about that. What did you see from your side?
Him and Ayrton came together. I don't know why.
Okay, best of luck. Thank you.
right, well, yes, I think Martin's right to feel that he's in a pretty solid third place, because he has got a 10-second lead on Jean Alesi, and so even if he doesn't get away ahead of him, all he's got to do is track him, and I think he feels his car is quicker, and that will hold his third place. Now, going back to something you were saying much earlier, Jonathan, about pressure for the restart, I've always found that once one's got the initial start out of the way, somehow the main pressure is lifted. In my experiences, dim and distant in the past, though they were, that restarted races or aborted starts for any reason, I would feel a lot less pressure and a lot more relaxed at the start. But I believe, I would have thought, there is one man out there, and only one, who will be feeling a great deal of pressure right now, and that will be Riccardo Patrese, because he's on pole, and this race is absolutely crucial for him. He still harbours strong hopes to win the World Championship, and he will know that if he's going to win, to keep those hopes properly alive, he needs to win today, and to do that, there's big pressure on him, because he has got to get into the first corner first. He knows that if Mansell gets ahead of him into the first corner, that his teammate is liable to drive away from him. He's been quicker all season. He was half a second quicker than him in qualifying, and Patrese's big chance is to get in front and then fend him off for the balance of the race. But for that reason, his race is between the start line and the first corner, or the main part of his race, and so he's got pressure.
Yes, indeed he has. Now, how long is this second half going to be? Well, if our complicated mathematics and checking on the rule book are correct, it is going to be 72 laps, less 18, which is 54, less 3, which is 51. So that means to say, effectively, the whole race will have been, with the two parts, over 69 laps. And I say again, as James has just emphasised, obviously, the main race at the front is between Riccardo Patrese and Nigel Mansell, with 9/10 of a second separating them after the first leg. Martin Brundle is 31 seconds on time ahead of Jean Alesi in fourth position. So Martin will be obviously trying desperately to catch the Williams in front of him. He's got a very handy cushion behind him. Mika Häkkinen, 31 seconds coincidentally behind Jean Alesi. Häkkinen in fifth place. And then in sixth position, Thierry Boutsen, who is 36 seconds behind Mika Häkkinen. Very encouraging, incidentally, for the Ligier team, because they have striven hard all season to get their new car with its Renault engine on the pace. It is ironic that there is a new ruling that is about to come into force in 1993, that teams will not be able to test at a circuit where a Grand Prix is held. And the very reason that the Ligier team moved to the Magny-Cours circuit was to enable them to have a test circuit on their doorstep. There are other controversial rules. The tyre widths are going to be reduced, the wing sizes are going to be reduced, the size of the car is going to be reduced. We've got 3 minutes before we restart, James.
Yes, indeed we have, as Patrese is beckoning one of his crew to come and have a word. Yes, and there they are, having a listen. And absolutely, the new rules, the testing rule is just one thing. Also, I think Vigier moved here for very advantageous terms for a brand new state-of-the-art factory. But the testing rule hasn't actually been fully quantified yet, because nobody has said exactly when it's in force and when it's not. For instance, I think it's clear that once the Grand Prix of that year has taken place, as the cars go out on their parade lap, teams can then go and do testing at the circuit that's already had its race. But whether they can only continue to do it within that calendar year, or whether it goes on till up to the first race of the next season, is not yet made clear. If it goes up to the first race of next season, then I personally agree with it, and so do most of the teams. If it's at the calendar year and they can't test through January and February at Grand Prix circuits, then we think that's a pity.
Ukio Katayama stuck on the grid. He was in 13th place at the end of the first leg. There's Patrese and Mansell. That's the passing point, the only real passing point, the approach to the Adelaide hairpin that you see at the bottom of your screen there, which they approach at some 190 miles an hour. And let us say this again, because it bears repeating. You've heard it from James and from I. It is most important to Riccardo Patrese this time that he does what he did last time. Get into the first corner, the left-hander, turn one, before the Estoril bend, before Nigel Mansell. Now there is Schumacher just in front of him, and us is the Tyrrell Ilmore of Olivier Grillard, who finished 9th in that first effectively 18-lap leg. 1 lap behind race leader Riccardo Patrese and Jonathan Palmer.
The cars are halfway down their second parade lap of the day. Another warm-up lap, so that means the race will be only 71 laps. I think, John, if I'm right, and Riccardo Patrese is on the pole position here.
Yes, and of course Nigel Mansell will be trying to make amends for that poor start he had at the first start of this Manicourt, this French Grand Prix. And the track conditions, they're not quite as dry as they were for the first start, but certainly everybody on the grid, on their dry weather tyres. Now the cars filing up onto the start positions. Patrese on the pole, Mansell on the inside.
Well, and then we wait for the man with the green flag to get ready, and I can see, I think it's all ready to go, and then we have to wait and see how long the red light is gonna be for the second start of the race here in Canada, or sorry, in France, the second start of the day. The red, I can't see a light change.
No, we
I
couldn't see
a light change.
And Olivier Grillard came from out inside the pack. I don't know whether it's because, oh, another shunt in the first corner. Well, we saw a major lockup of brakes. Patrese again got the jump on Nigel Mansell. So what has been going on here? The lights, from our position, we couldn't see any change, but Mansell now very determined indeed, closing in on Riccardo Patrese, and I expect him to pop out coming under braking and see Mansell take the lead.
Well, he did.
Well done, Nigel. Thank you very much. Well, oh, and Patrese has come up the inside. The pair of them are at it again.
Oh, and it's
one.
Schumacher spinning again.
I cannot believe this. Michael Schumacher, what have you been doing this time?
Michael Schumacher for the second time. Oh, well, Stefano just pushed him off the road, and the
top wishbone, you see it in the car, is broken. This time, no opportunity for Schumacher to get back into the race.
And that is very terminal. So Riccardo Patrese, I think, is leading. I'm gonna wait for a head-on shot. Here we see it again. Look to the right of your screen. Michael Schumacher, well, he did go up in the air with Ayrton Senna, but this time with Stefano Motta, he went sky high.
Yes, and well, Michael Schumacher, this has not been his day. We've seen him perform fantastically.
Oh, Patrese is going slow. Patrese came past the pits and waved Nigel Mansell past, John. Now, I don't know whether he's got a problem or whether they've said, listen, boys, no racing. Mansell is leading this race. Mansell is going to win this race with 50 laps to go to the end of this race.
Well, that was fairly emphatic. on the part of Riccardo Patrese. Now Nigel Mansell leading this Grand Prix. Riccardo has certainly made the point that he's capable of leading, but the amount of racing that went on between these two drivers is, in my mind, not how a team of this caliber ought to be run. When your number one driver, or your equal number one driver, as Williams prefer to call them, is leading the championship, and your main opposition, Ayrton Senna, is out of the race, you must allow Mansell to score as many points as possible, and you must not let your two drivers battle it out for the lead. While it might look great on the TV and it might be great for the public, as far as winning championships are concerned, you've got to go with what is the best for the team, and right now, having Mansell lead this race is the best for the team.
Nigel Mansell leading Riccardo Patrese by, I suppose, just over a second, which means that Riccardo Patrese in effect is still leading this race. He is after 20 laps by 0.2 of a second, although Mansell is ahead on the road. Brundle is third, 22 seconds behind. Alesi is fourth, Häkkinen fifth, Boutsen sixth, Comer seventh, Herbert eighth, ninth Capelli, 10th Alboreto, and that is maybe not the current situation on the road, but the current situation on the computer with the times as they should be, the two races together.
Yes, the combined situation still has Riccardo Patrese in the lead by 0.2 of a second. But as you can see in the road now, I would say Mansell has actually got the lead. As well as on the road, it is on the computer.
Mansell just pulling out a little lead over Riccardo Patrese. He's got 49 laps to go. The race now 70 laps on this 2.6 mile long Magny-Cours circuit.
Well, Martin Brundle forlornly trying to keep up with Riccardo Patrese. You know, he's trying so hard to keep in contact with the second of the two Williamses. But ultimately, the power of the Williams and the fact that the Williams is such a gentle car on the tyres. But look, now we see the situation clear. Nigel Mansell leading, Riccardo Patrese second. The gap is now 0.8 of a second in Mansell's favour.
And Mansell being nearly just over a second faster than Riccardo Patrese on that lap. And we've got Aguri Suzuki retiring, and that's the sad side for the footwork team, who had two cars well in the top 10. Well, there's one out of it now. Michele Alboreto is still there.
And Nigel Mansell, just to reinforce his dominance in this race, has recorded the fastest race lap, 1 minute 18.766.
Which is a new lap record, John.
Yes, I realise that, and I'm sure Nigel Mansell will not just stop at that. I'm sure we'll see Mansell make more inroads, create more lap records today, because this is, as we have mentioned earlier, an opportunity for him to get one step further towards that chance of winning the championship that has really evaded him for so many years.
Mansell completing lap 22 ahead of teammate Riccardo Patrese. Mansell another new lap record, a 1:18.667 this time. Riccardo Patrese in the 1:19s, Martin Brundle in the 1:19s, Jean Alesi in the 1:20s. Häkkinen is still there, 3 seconds behind the Ferrari. Thierry Boutsen is behind Mika Häkkinen, Eric Gomez, Ivan Capelli, Johnny Herbert and Michele Alboreto. The top 10 still the same, and we've got 18 cars still running in this French Grand Prix.
Well, Nigel Mansell just continuing to pull away from the teammate Riccardo Patrese. And really, this is what we all had expected to see at the start, the first start of the French Grand Prix this year. Mansell made a couple of attempts. He eventually got past at the end of the straight, and Patrese responded. Now there's a yellow flag, a static yellow flag. Well, that looks like Suzuki's car that we see off on the left-hand side of the track. And there's a car off there. Yes, that's the Suzuki Footberg Mugen. That went off a lap ago. We saw Suzuki running across the circuit to safety behind the pit wall, or behind the wall around the circuit. And now Mansell coming on to the start-finish line. Let's see, yet again, as he created another new lap record. Yes, he has. 1 minute 18.515, and he's now some 2 seconds clear of Riccardo Patrese.
Nigel Mansell well on his way to win the 27th Grand Prix out of his Grand Prix career, which is his 173rd Grand Prix start. Although, John, I know you're going to say, well, he's got a long way to go yet. Anything can happen.
Yes, he has, and you only have to remember back to Monte Carlo when we were talking about his 27th victory at that Grand Prix, and then it all went wrong. A wheel nut came loose. Well, the Williams team is undoubtedly one of the most professional teams I've ever seen in any form of motor racing, and I can't imagine another failure like that could ever occur. But Mansell has a long way yet to go in this Grand Prix.
Guru Suzuki's car is parked in a very unpleasant spot, I must say, John.
Yes, it is. I was thinking that the car could do with being removed, but of course I don't believe there's a crane at that part of the circuit, and of course marshals are not too keen to expose themselves to the danger of going into one of the gravel traps and trying to remove that car. So really it's up to the drivers to be aware. They are aware now. Of course they'll have seen the car there for a number of laps. It may well be we'll see the static yellow flag held out for the entirety of this Grand Prix, indicating there is a hazard, and of course that means you're not allowed to overtake at that point in the circuit either.
Another new lap record for Nigel Mansell, a 1:18.026, and that was on lap 24. Riccardo Patrese, the other man in the 1:18s. Martin Brundle and Jean Alesi, together with Mika Hakkinen, are in the 1:19s, and the rest is slower. Although Eric Comas in 7th, also in the 19s.
Yeah, just below me I've seen Michael Schumacher walking back to the Benetton pits, and of course he had to walk past the McLaren pit to do so. And I didn't see Ayrton Senna running out and asking him, "Oh, what happened this time then, Michael? I did give you some advice. What went wrong then?"
Well, that's he said. Schumacher probably said, "Well, I'll try and round the outside this time," and it didn't work either.
Yes, well, that's one of those days Michael Schumacher will want to forget. In the meantime, his teammate Martin Brundle in 3rd place, but dropping away from the Williams duo. Some now 25 seconds behind Riccardo Patrese in 3rd place, and fairly comfortable in that 3rd place, with Jean Alesi a further 11 seconds behind him. Well, that's what it looked like, but in fact Alesi is now some 3 or 4 seconds behind Martin Brundle.
I know, but of course he's very close on the road, John, but Martin had a very long gap before the race was stopped when Jean Alesi had that little skirmish with Mika Hakkinen. And of course on lap 18 Jean Alesi just passed Mika Hakkinen again, so he did lose some time in that.
Yes, it is a little confusing because we have to put together the first part of the race and the second part of the race. Well, there we see Suzuki's car finally being removed by one of the articulated vehicles, driven into the gravel trap, picked up and taken away.
Magny-Cours, the home of Ligier. Thierry Boutsen leading teammate Eric Comas, and Boutsen going through a very difficult year so far, because not only is the Ligier off the pace, also he gets beaten regularly by Eric Comas. And of course that vital point in Canada the team has to get out of or keep out of pre-qualifying was also done by Eric Comas. So I think Thierry Boutsen is going through a very tough time so far this year, but here he's leading his teammate.
Yes, Boutsen, in now his 10th season of Formula 1 racing, and a very fine driver, but of course when you've been in Grand Prix racing a long time and then you get a very talented and much younger driver coming in who has got no experience to fall back on, he's just simply fast, it can make life very difficult indeed. And we've seen it with Nelson Piquet last year, with Michael Schumacher. I know I've experienced it personally when Alan Prost joined McLaren. You think you're doing a good job, and then a youngster comes along and gets in, no preconceptions, just drives the wheels off the car. It does catch your attention. Well, Comas' car puffing smoke on the exit, and well, let's keep an eye on Eric Comas. As Olivier Grillard goes shredding paper, he must have gotten a little bit wide coming onto the start-finish straight, coming out of the pits. In fact, Grillard just having had a pit stop. And now we see
Stefano Modena.
Yes, another very disappointing day indeed for the Jordan team. We saw Gugelmin go out in the first lap. Eddie Jordan just walking behind his cars. So Stefano Modena's race looks at this point to be over as well. In the meantime, the mercurial Nigel Mansell 4.7 seconds now ahead of Riccardo Patrese. Patrese recording his quickest race lap to date, 1 minute 18.568.
Well, John, I mean, all the drivers are being kept up to date what the current situation is with those two aggregate results. Now, I must say, Martin Brundle's got Jean Alesi breathing down his neck. Would there be any fighting Jean Alesi if Jean Alesi decides to attack Martin Brundle in that sole remaining Camel Benetton fault?
I would have thought that Martin would want to keep him behind him, because one never knows just how quick the opposition is capable of going, and once you get ahead of a car, once Alesi, for example, would get ahead of Martin Brundle, then the tenths and half seconds can start to drift away, and it would allow Alesi to eat into Brundle's third place. So I'm sure Brundle will not encourage any efforts from Jean Alesi to take on the road that third place. Well, Jean Alesi, of course, racing in France. It's his home Grand Prix, and he is one of the most impressive of the charge-on brigade of drivers in Formula One. And his eyes will be just boring holes into the back of Martin Brundle's Benetton. But the Benetton is capable of running quickly, and as we saw in Canada, capable of running a lot quicker than the two Ferraris were. The development that has taken place since Canada by Ferrari, both in terms of engine work, new front suspension, and continued work with the aerodynamics, combined with the fact that Manicourt is a very flat and a very smooth circuit, all add to the improved performance that we're seeing from particularly Jean Alesi with this quite difficult Ferrari this year.
Well, Jean Alesi making a good recovery from a very big accident he had last week in Silverstone testing. I mean, he doesn't seem to suffer any little bit.
No, the accident, I think, was probably, I don't want to say it was an exaggerated report of what happened. It was a very unpleasant accident. I think the aspect that was most worrying for everybody was that his crash hat managed to get split somehow. It's believed that when the car hit the barrier, Alesi's head hit the steering wheel, and that was enough to split the helmet just on his cheek. So while he suffered a bit of whiplash, the team doctors and the medication that he would have had when he returned home was more than enough to get this man fit. And of course, driving in your home Grand Prix and all the adrenaline that goes with it is enough to anaesthetize any discomfort or pain that Alesi may be suffering at this time.
Jean Alesi in the hunt for Martin Brundle, the yellow and green Benetton and the red Ferrari, while Nigel Mansell leads Riccardo Patrese after 29 laps with 6.4 seconds. Martin Brundle is 28.4 seconds behind. Then it's Jean Alesi who's 10 seconds behind Martin Brundle. Mika Häkkinen's fifth, Thierry Boutsen sixth, so the top six remains the same. Then it's Comas, Capelli, Herbert and Alboreto, places 7 till 10. Gianni Morbidelli in 11th with the Minardi Lamborghini, Ukio Katayama with the Venturi LaRousse, Pierluigi Martini, Andrea de Cesaris, Carl Wendlinger, JJ Leto and Olivier Grouillard complete the field, while Nigel Mansell completes lap 30 in 1:17.971.
Well, you can see the gap on the road. Of course, that gap in reality is much greater. Jean Alesi some 10.1 seconds on aggregate behind Martin Brundle, so not only has he got to find a way past Martin Brundle, he's got to make up something like a further 8 seconds, in fact, to take third place away from the Benetton driver. Well, Riccardo Patrese now got a fairly lonely job. He's got pretty clear road behind him and a fairly clear road ahead of him, and his moment of glory really came to a halt when the first part of this Grand Prix was halted. He did get the advantage at the start of the second part of the Grand Prix, but either something, he missed a gear or something coming onto the pit straight, or quite simply it was just a gesture that he allowed Mansell to go through. But from Mansell's point of view, of course, there was no gesture involved. He's just gone absolutely flat out and has been lapping about 3/10 to half a second quicker consistently than Riccardo Patrese, and now got a lead. In fact, he just recorded yet another new lap record of 1 minute 17.614 seconds, and his lead over Riccardo Patrese is now 8.499 seconds. It is in fact larger than that as you see it, but that is taking into account the time differential between the two cars when the first part of the race was stopped.
And Riccardo Patrese now doing exactly the same time, so within a tenth of Martin Brundle. Jean Alesi is, say, half a second slower than those two. Mika Häkkinen being a couple of tenths slower than Jean Alesi, and Thierry Boutsen and Eric Comas following. Comas now being the quicker of the two Ligier drivers, but he is 2.05 seconds behind teammate Boutsen. And Johnny Herbert is the first man in the 120s in 9th position. But Riccardo Patrese may be pacing himself more to the pace of Martin Brundle than to the pace of Nigel Mansell at the moment.
Well, I just think he isn't capable of running at Mansell's pace. It's as simple as that. So Patrese now really ensconced in second place, not under any threat from Martin Brundle, almost 30 seconds behind. And really all his job is just to back up Mansell and just bring it home in second place.
Nigel Mansell leads the French Grand Prix here at Magny-Cours. He is on lap 33. We're going to take a short break. Join us after that, live here on Eurosport.
A lot in reserve. And it's a great credit to Martin Brundle and to the Benetton team, whose cars have been so reliable this year, that he is able to keep ahead of the charging Ferrari and Jean Alesi. Mika Häkkinen's Lotus there, more encouragement, and I understand unofficially that Lotus, who are about to have a big announcement about something, may well have got, and I'm hopefully putting 2 and 2 together and making 4, may well have got the sponsorship that they need as the result of appointing Guy Edwards, probably the best man in the world to get sponsorship, to be their marketing director. But we'll have to wait on that if it is true, and the fact that Lotus have not only got a superb couple of team bosses in Peter Collins and Peter Wright, but now a magnificent new car and 2 super drivers in Herbert and Häkkinen. And if they can add money to that, they are going to be on their way to making Lotus the great team that it was in Colin Chapman's days. Martini has come into the pits. Nigel Mansell is now on his 34th lap out of 69. So effectively he has gone half the distance of the 1992 French Grand Prix. And coming towards us now, you see Thierry Boutsen's Ligier. There is the Belgian, and he is in 6th position on aggregate. And we've got another battle here, because behind him is his teammate Eric Comas, less than 2 seconds behind him, and they are battling for 6th position. And this is the team whose headquarters are right here at Magny-Cours. They have Renault engines, as do the Williams team, but the Ligier team have not used those engines anything like as well as Williams have, but now they're starting to get the car right, and these 2 teammates are battling for 6th position in a situation where there is not a great deal of love lost between them, which is a masterpiece of understatement. And Comas is doing his best, having set.
And of course you're watching Eurosport, where Nigel Mansell is leading the French Grand Prix, and you're looking at Eric Comas chasing teammate Thierry Boutsen, who is 2.5 seconds behind on aggregate times. And we just had a little discussion during the break, the first race being stopped at lap 18, that was the result, and now we get another 52 lap race, so in total we'll have 70 laps for this French Grand Prix, and we'll keep you informed on the overall situation, which is Carl Wendlinger retiring, I suppose, his March. We saw a lot of smoke coming out, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's an overheated engine.
Yes, we saw the car sitting on the grid and lots of liquid coming out of it, and that, I'm sure, is all a reflection of what took place at the opening lap of the first part of this French Grand Prix, when Wendlinger went pirouetting over the curbs on the inside of the Adelaide hairpin, and undoubtedly there was some damage to one of the water pipes or possibly the radiator itself.
Olivier Couriard now in front of Nigel Mansell. Couriard trying to use his mirrors as best as I can, I suppose, but I must say he's been very good this weekend, John.
Yeah, certainly watching him in Canada, he did appear to be much more considerate to the leading cars throughout the Grand Prix. And the only trouble is, every time I tell him to do something what I consider to be correct, his team manager Ken Tyrrell turns around and says, "Don't use your mirrors, just worry about what's going on in front of you."
Well, there's a team manager who's not worried anymore. I think he was when Nigel and Ricciardo were racing each other, but Nigel Mansell now 10.1 seconds ahead of teammate Riccardo Patrese. Mansell past Olivier Couriard, who's now 2 laps behind. Martin Brundle in third, and from Martin Brundle's point of view, I think that's the best he can hope for during this Grand Prix, or maybe during any Grand Prix.
Well, certainly in this Grand Prix, I think, assuming that the two Williams run like clockwork as we've seen them do so much this year, then if Martin get on the podium, it would be his first podium finish of the year, and a very happy boy he would be from Kings Lynn up in Norfolk. And it would be some salvation for the Benetton team, because to lose their other young charger, Michael Schumacher, for sure the pair of them make a very powerful team indeed. And not only is it just the drivers' points that are at stake, of course, the team points at stake, the manufacturers' championship, which in many respects is more important to the teams, because it is as a result of how the team performs, and it is that how they determine the travelling arrangements for the teams going to the overseas races, and of course then how they also make their own financial arrangements. So vitally important for the teams to gain as many points as they can in a race as it is for the drivers in their own championships.
Well, looking at the top 12 at the moment, if Martin Brundle finishes in third place, it would be his best result, which currently is a 4th place, and that was Australia 1986 and Imola 1992. Mansell a 19.2. Mansell dropping the pace a little bit, also got held up by Olivier Couriard. Riccardo Patrese is second still. He's doing high 18s. Martin Brundle now doing mid 19s, and the only thing I'm worried about at the moment is that it's getting a little bit darker again. John, I see more rain clouds coming over Magny-Cours that I've seen.
Yes, it is getting more overcast again, and it wouldn't be a surprise to see the umbrellas going up and the rain tires being readied. But just as you're talking about Martin Brundle, one result that in fact doesn't stand in the record books, and it's nothing to do with Martin, but his team was back in Detroit in 1985. I think Martin probably finished second, but in the post-race scrutineering, the Tyrrell was disqualified for some technicality. Now I've got an idea what it is, but I can't really repeat it because I couldn't put it into the terms that would be, strictly speaking, clear enough. Anyway, the team were disqualified, and I know that the team did take that disqualification to the highest court in the Formula One land, and even they threw it out. But it was a great shame because Martin Brundle deserved his second place. He wasn't a party to the technical infringement that the team were involved in, and I also remember a great race that Martin had back in 1989 at Monaco in the Brabham, and really he was on course to get another podium finish there, but he had a problem. He had to come into the pits, and I think he finally finished in 5th place.
It was a flat battery, wasn't it, there?
I think it was. In fact, they had a misfire which was traced to be a flat battery, and in fact his teammate at that point, Stefano Modena, managed to take his podium place.
Jean Alesi we're riding with, but Jean Alesi got something on the lens, and that is a Ferrari going slow, so I suppose that's Ivan Capelli.
Well, there seems to be a lot of heat coming from the back of the Ferrari. You can see that heat haze as the car is going slowly. And we're assuming it is Ivan Capelli, the different coloured gloves. Yes, the confirmation of the helmet. Ivan Capelli now having another on. Well, here we see him coming down there. Yes, the Ferrari engine finally giving up the ghost. And another disappointment for this man from being an Italian driver in a Ferrari team is very, very hard indeed. And I think poor Ivan Capelli suffered greatly indeed. He's a driver of a lot of ability, in my opinion. He's proved himself to be one of the best racers and certainly one of the best overtakers in Formula One. But really, his year at Ferrari has gone all wrong for him. And with his morale, his confidence, his commitment being sapped, we're not seeing anything like the capacity of Ivan Capelli.
Jean Alesi being his enthusiastic self and spectacular self all during qualifying again here, lying in 4th place. The fact that Ivan Capelli retired out of this race and he joins the list of Senna, Schumacher, Gewinnt, Tarquini, Modena, Chiesa, Gerhard Berger, Aguri Suzuki. But the fact that Capelli is out makes Johnny Herbert moves up a place, and Herbert now into 7th. Sorry, into 8th, because of course Eric Comas is still in 7th place. The Ligiers in 6th and 7th. So the Ligiers, if they would get another point, I would say they are definitely out of pre-qualifying worries. Of course, Silverstone the last chance to score points, and before the in Hockenheim we get new people into pre-qualifying.
Well, that pre-qualification on Friday morning is a real nightmare for a team. The additional work they have to do, they've got to get to the circuit something like 5 o'clock in the morning to ensure that everything is prepared. Inevitably the circuit is dirty. It's what we would describe in the trade as being green, and it puts enormous stress and pressures on a team. And it is not really a true representation of a team's competitiveness. We've often seen cars, teams running in pre-qualification who've got no need or right to be there, but that's the rule. And the pre-qualification change, I think, actually applies from Silverstone. This is the 8th race, so in effect the change should in fact occur at Silverstone. So for those people that fail to score points, and really there's an opportunity right now for those people who are in those difficult situations, since we've lost the 2 McLarens, we've lost one of the Ferraris, we've lost one of the Benettons. So there are opportunities, and these are the situations where teams really who are running at the back of the grid hope and pray for, because ordinarily they never get a look in the points.
Well, one of the team that's definitely going to stay in pre-qualifying and will stay there for the rest of the year is Andrea Moda, and they have to even have a struggle to get to Silverstone because their car is in one of the biggest truck blockades in the south of France. It's near Lyon, and as Roberto Moreno, one of the Andrea Moda drivers, said, he said, well, the problem was we left too early because we were going to do a day's testing in Le Mans, and on the Monday night we left and they got into that blockade, and there are only about 10 or 12 trucks in front of them and about 150 trucks behind that truck, and they just can't move it.
No, any chance of getting near to a truck, you're immediately, literally, physically rejected. But also we've now got news, Jean Alesi actually has got past Martin Brundle on the road. He's still behind him in terms of the combined times between the first race and where we are in the second race, but Jean Alesi somewhere on the circuit has managed to find a way past Martin Brundle.
6 cars being in pre-qualifying, of course, and 4 cars going through. If it is like this, Venturi LaRousse is in there with 2 cars. They stay in there despite that point that Bertrand Gachot got in Monaco. Von Metal with 2 cars instead of 1, so Gabriele Tarquini's got to get up early as well. And Andrea Moda, as I said, will stay in. Unless, of course, Venturi LaRousse will get more points than Ligier does here today, then Ligier will be in pre-qualifying.
Well, the situation stands, there's only one Venturi LaRousse car running. We saw Bertrand Gachot drop out at the very early part of the race. There are 2 Ligiers running, and one of them's in the points, the other one's running 7th. So at least they're going to pick up potentially 1 point, and there's still the chance they may get at least another one.
Nigel Mansell completing yet another lap. Lap 42 is completed. 1:19.339. That was the lap time. He's just taking it easy. Riccardo Patrese being a long way behind now, crossing the line just in front of JJ Leto. 15.7 seconds, and of course I keep saying lap 42. Well, we've had 18 laps on the first race, you can say, and then the rest, it's now 24 laps into the second race.
Yes, and I'm just wondering, why are the two Williams beginning to drop back to the pace of the rest of the field? They certainly could run very comfortably in the 18s. We saw Nigel Mansell dip briefly into the high one minute 17-second bracket. Most everybody else, and now we see also Mika Häkkinen about to come up and overtake Martin Brundle. There you see it, and that appears to me that Martin Brundle may well have a problem we're not aware of. We were aware that Jean Alesi a few laps ago got past Martin, and now Mika Häkkinen. Of course, Häkkinen is still behind in the combined times, but ahead on the road. And I suspect that Martin Brundle may well have something like overheating. He's having to be very prudent with the pace he's running at.
Which would be very sad to say, because, well, I think also that's motor racing. John Martin looking after the car, being a bit lucky, being third, just minding his own business, and then he's dropping back very rapidly at the moment.
Yes, also just looking at that high camera position, a few more drops of rain falling. I'm sure that isn't the reason why Martin is dropping behind. He's lost 2 places on the road, and very shortly now, well, Jean Alesi in fact is in third place. He's made up enough time. He's taken third place away from Martin Brundle. Martin Brundle is now in fourth, Mika Häkkinen still in fifth, although Mika Häkkinen is ahead of Brundle as you look at the two cars on the road.
Martin Brundle is in fact 0.2 of a second behind Jean Alesi. They can't see each other, but that's the situation as it stands. Nigel Mansell, there we see it. Martin Brundle just a couple of tenths behind Jean Alesi. Mika Häkkinen on the next lap will definitely be in front of Martin Brundle. Thierry Boutsen's in 6th. He should be the next man to get hold of front. If you look at the lap times, they're about 3 to 4 seconds slower than he was doing earlier on. Nigel Mansell leads the French Grand Prix here at Magny-Cours. Join us live for the remainder of this race here on Eurosport.
Martin Brundle is 7.5 seconds. So if Häkkinen, who has just passed the Englishman, can get 8 seconds ahead of him in this second leg, he will have moved up to third place on aggregate. And there is the Ferrari of Jean Alesi, who has passed the Englishman Martin Brundle. Now let's see if we can see the Benetton or the Lotus coming into the picture as Jean Alesi in the Ferrari V12 chasing, but not very successfully, Riccardo Patrese, because he is 39 seconds behind the Italian. Martin Brundle is now 3 seconds behind Alesi on aggregate, and Häkkinen is now 5 seconds behind Martin Brundle on aggregate, so he's catching him. And soon the cameras are going to be showing the Benetton of Martin Brundle, the Lotus of Mika Häkkinen, battling for 4th position on aggregate as Griard is caught in the Tyrrell Ilmore to be lapped by Jean Alesi in the Ferrari. Now I suspect that umbrella shot is being shown to us to indicate that rain is coming down again. Indeed it is, and that would help, would probably help Martin Brundle a bit more than Jean Alesi. But Mansell is on his 46th lap now.
Yes, and Mansell certainly spotted the rain. He's slowed down a bit. And the rain is really starting to come down.
Yes, the rain's certainly coming down quite hard now. It's building up very quickly. This could be the saviour for Martin Brundle if it gets him a chance to have that misfire sorted out.
Yes, and remember, if they reach three-quarter...
Call for the French Grand Prix because the umbrellas are up and it's raining again. Nigel Mansell leads Riccardo Patrese, Jean Alesi, Martin Brundle now only leads Mika Häkkinen by 2 seconds. Thierry Boutsen and Eric Gomez are 6th and 7th. But John, it's coming down again.
Yes, and again you can just see this is the middle section of the track, and there is spray coming off the rear tyres of Nigel Mansell's Williams. And I just wonder how long it's going to be before we yet again see a red flag being put out. But interestingly, we're very close to three-quarter race distance. And if a race is stopped at three-quarter or after race distance, then it is called a race. And I'm sure, unless the conditions deteriorate very suddenly in the next number of laps, we're going to see this race called a race in about 5 or so laps.
Well, rain tyres being readied for the teams just in case it does start to rain. There's about 6 or 7 laps to go to quarter distance. Nigel Mansell, lap time is now in the 1:23. The lap record, the new lap record he's got is a 1:17.0 and a very little bit, but lap time so 6 or 7, and everybody's looking to the right here. I can't see what's happening in that chicane. His cameraman
Mika
Häkkinen has spun.
Well, he didn't quite spin. He got it absolutely sideways. And Martin Brundle, of course, who he was racing with, has now had the opportunity to get back up onto the gearbox of Mika Häkkinen, but I think it's all really somewhat academic. Mika Häkkinen coming onto the pit straight, got the car absolutely sideways. It took a bite, shot across the road. Here we go. Oh, he did spin it, in fact. Well, he did well to keep it running, get it back into first gear, do a quick donut and get back underway. In the meantime, this man Nigel Mansell running very quickly indeed in spite of these very difficult conditions. You can see the sheen on the tyres of Mansell's Williams coming down to one of the slipperiest parts of this circuit, coming onto the start finish line. Look how slow he's coming on, just looking for grip all the time.
Interesting is also now the rain starts to fall again, is that Martin Brundle sort of picked up the pace. Martin's still behind Mika Häkkinen, but he's also closing back in on Jean Alesi. And remember, he's only got to be 9 seconds behind Jean Alesi to be ahead of him, if you know what I mean.
Well, we think you know what you mean. Well, at the end of the day, we've got to combine the results of these 2 Grand Prix. We're seeing the second of 2 right now. The first one was stopped on the 20th lap because of rain. We've now got rain falling again, and I believe that the clerk of the course will really want to allow this to go as far as he can to get to that three-quarter race distance. And then at that point, and then we see Thierry Boutsen has spun. He has lost his 6th place. Eric Comas now in 6th, and Boutsen, I think, has also managed to stall the engine. The Williams team have got rain tyres ready just below us, but this is a very unpleasant moment for those poor marshals. They're pushing Thierry Boutsen's car against the flow of traffic. I'm not quite sure what Boutsen is trying to do. Is he going to try and get into the pit lane?
I think he's trying to bump start the engine.
Well, he's not going to do it that way. He's going to try and, I think, get into the pit lane or else turn the car around. Well, that was outside assistance. Here we see Grillard, and who's that inside of him? Oh, Jean Alesi.
JJ Leto.
JJ Leto, yes.
Looking up, and did they touch?
Well, look, a right pair of headbangers, the pair of them are. Yes, they did, because Grillard spun. Leto just about lost it, got it back together again. About what you'd expect from those two. It's a bit like a rock meeting a hard case sometimes.
Well, Thierry Boutsen's unhappy season continues. He lost that point he had, and he lost it, well, luckily for the Ligier team, to his teammate Eric Comas.
Now he's actually going down the pit lane the wrong way. I wonder, will he get a fine for that? Although it's being assisted in the pit lane. I remember Niki Lauda one time was disqualified from a race in Belgium when he overshot the pits and they pushed the car back. In fact, Niki stuck it in reverse and drove it back, and he was disqualified. I suppose it's all somewhat academic, in fact, because in effect Thierry Boutsen is now out of this year's French Grand Prix. In the meantime, Nigel Mansell still the quickest man on the course by, well, a fairly comfortable margin. Mansell's lap now into the 1 minute 27 second bracket. The next quickest man is that Rainmeister, when we see him here, Jean Alesi, the man who starred in Barcelona,
who's caught up right with Riccardo Patrese.
Indeed he has.
Nigel Mansell into the pits.
Well,
Nigel Mansell
wet tyres.
Comes into the pits to change to wet weather tyres. Now we're going to get the clock on that. He's coming in right underneath our commentary position. Nigel Mansell on lap 49 into the pits. The wet weather tyres are on. And let's assume that is the right decision, John.
I think it is the right decision, because Riccardo Patrese and John Alesi will not have the same level of grip as Nigel Mansell. In fact, they haven't appeared past us anyway. There we see Patrese just popping into view. So Nigel Mansell's had the benefit of a pit stop, fitted wet weather tyres, and now really it's all, I would say, somewhat academic. But he must be careful, because although the circuit is wet, it isn't what I would describe as wet. There isn't enough water to truly make a wet weather tyre work to its maximum efficiency, but that situation isn't going to take very long. And now Martin Brundle in the pits, doing likewise, coming in for his set of wet weather Goodyear tyres, and you can see from the sheen on those slick tyres just how wet it is. Martin Brundle out.
Is a very good stop by the
and this may well
team.
mean, or provide Martin Brundle with the opportunity to get back onto the podium, because as we say that, Jean Alesi and Riccardo Patrese are completing another lap on their dry tyres.
The situation as it stands is that,
and Patrese's tyres are now ready for him as well, so we would expect to see Riccardo Patrese at the end of this lap coming in. But Martin Brundle came in that one lap earlier and may have gained some advantage, and locking up the right.
Oh, Martin.
No, Marty baby. Well, you just squeaked around on the outside. That's what I mean about wet weather tyres not necessarily having the biggest advantage that you might think they have.
Okio Katayama coming past very slowly.
Well, as you see, the circuit, it's got a sheen, but it doesn't actually have heavy water on it. And Martin Brundle just gave us a very good example. Riccardo Patrese now in the pits, but Martin Brundle at the end of the pit straight came down, put the brakes on, locked the fronts up. And it doesn't always follow that because you put wet weather tyres on, you're automatically safe. Good pit stop for Riccardo Patrese, back out again.
Riccardo, nearly losing it there.
Yes, one side and the other, and Mika Häkkinen now just coming onto the pit straight behind Riccardo Patrese, but of course Häkkinen still on his slicks. Olivier Grillard in the pits now. So I suspect of this race, and there we see Katayama, his car being pushed away, and the rain falling very heavily indeed now. And now we're getting the kind of conditions for which these wet weather tyres were intended to be used.
So Riccardo Patrese is in second place, behind teammate Nigel Mansell. In third still Jean Alesi, who I haven't seen in the pits. Michele Alboreto just came into the pits for wets, and I suppose Jean Alesi should come in very, very soon.
Yes, Alesi's got to really make a pit stop. The conditions now, in my opinion, are much too bad to stay out. The amount of time that you will lose by staying out is much, much too great.
Well, there's a Lotus in the pits, I think, John.
Well, here's Alesi. Is he going to come in? Well, little Jean Alesi, never say die, still staying out. You could just see Patrese's car ahead of him. Well, Alesi technically still in second place. So maybe the strategy the team are banking on is that the race may well not go full distance. But on the road, Jean Alesi still is in second place. So we're waiting to see what difference in time between Patrese and Alesi there is. And also we want to look at the lap times. Well, Patrese now has been credited with being in second place. Jean Alesi now some 6 seconds. The computer, we had to wait for it to catch up with all the pit stops, cars coming in and out of the pits. And there we have Riccardo Patrese. Well, you see just how slippery it is. Very, very slick indeed, coming onto the pit straight. Jean Alesi still on his dry tyres, going around the outside of the corner, and very often in the rain that is the quicker way around. The track is cleaner there. There's not the rubber that you have on the inside of the circuit on the line around a corner, but very, very difficult conditions in which to drive. The degree of concentration required to do this is just unbelievable.
John, if you look at the times, Jean Alesi is doing 1:33s, and Nigel Mansell is doing 1:33s as well. So for the moment, if the rain stops, I think Alesi might have made the right decision.
Yes, but I think right now there's more chance of the rain stopping than there is of me being struck by lightning. That's getting heavier and heavier. And while this is a gamble on the part of Ferrari and John Alesi, there's an awful lot to be lost by staying out in slick tyres, and a lot more to be gained by going in and putting on wet weather tyres.
Nigel Mansell doing a 1:33.6, John Alesi a 1:34.2. We've got to wait for Riccardo Patrese to see whether Alesi is in second or still in third, and there is John Alesi on the grass. Well, you said it.
Yes, I'm sorry I did say it, because it was inevitable. Conditions really now are very wet indeed, and I would say that really it's in the interest of Ferrari to tell Jean Alesi to come in and make a pit stop. Here we see what's going to happen. Yeah, but look, so simple. Coming out of the very quick corner, back, gets away onto the grass, and well, you don't have to be Brain of Britain to work it out. It's going to happen at some stage, and even a driver of the quality and skill of Jean Alesi could do nothing to stop the car on the grass, and that car probably spun for something like 200 metres.
Mika Häkkinen in the pits for his wet weather tyre. All four of them, to be honest. And there is another man who was still on slicks, Andrea de Cesaris.
Yes, and the left front tyre, left front wheel looks to be slightly out of line. Well, these are the gambles that the teams take. But when you see people coming in, and the majority are coming in for wet weather tyres, you have to believe that they know something you don't know, and therefore you should really follow suit. Now, will Alesi come in this time? Surely that little slip off the straight.
No, he's not.
Oh, dear me. I mean, what do you say? What do you say about a guy who just keeps going and going and going? Morbidelli on wet weather tyres, almost losing control.
Jean Alesi doing a 1:46, John, with that little spin included. So that is 12 seconds he lost with 16 laps to go, and we're on lap 54 if we take the overall picture.
Yes, well, that's the part of the circuit we saw Alesi have a spin one lap ago.
I say he was very lucky not to hit anything.
He was indeed. And still pressing on. We mentioned before that this circuit does give a lot of grip even when it is damp. But the minute the water, yellow flags wave somebody up in this quick right-left.
That's Andrea de Cesaris' car.
That's right, I've stuck off on the gravel trap.
Now that Mika Häkkinen has made his pit stop, Johnny Herbert is in 5th place. Mika Häkkinen is in 6th, 4 seconds behind. Häkkinen, including the stop, doing a 2:04 lap. And Johnny Herbert, I think, and I'm looking to my right, is still on slicks. And we can see that at the lap times, so 1:39, some 5 seconds slower than the top runner. So expect Johnny Herbert to come in fairly soon. But we've got both Lotuses in the top 6. Well, John, he's going to go now.
I don't know. I've given up on John Alesi right now.
Well, so...
I mean, the rain is still falling, and it's falling heavily. I don't know what he thinks he's achieving by doing this. Let's look at the lap time as he goes across. Well, it's
just
still
as quick
matching.
as Mansell.
I know. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, this I cannot explain.
We'll call it bravery, maybe.
Yeah, Alesi's been given the sign 4 tyres. And in spite of it, it's a truly courageous effort on the part of John Alesi, or anybody else for that matter out there in slicks.
John, if he's 21 seconds behind now, I know he's got to go and stop for tyres, but if he does the same times as Mansell on slicks, then he is obviously going to go quicker when he's got the wets on, so he should be the fastest man out, and he's, knowing Alesi, probably going to go for Patrese.
Yes, but he will lose something like 30 seconds with the entry into the pit lane, the stop, the getting back up to speed again before he gets onto the circuit. So that would be a big bite into us. And Johnny Herbert has just come into the pit lane as we're speaking. So now we've got really very few people on the circuit on slicks, and Johnny Herbert's decided that really he's not man enough for this job today. It's very difficult conditions indeed. And prudently he popped into the pits.
Now there was Pierluigi Martini who popped into the pits, and he was on slicks. Mansell leads Patrese, Jean Alesi, Martin Brundle, Mika Häkkinen and Johnny Herbert. We saw the two Finns going through our pictures, JJ Lehto and Mika Häkkinen. And this morning we said during the warm-up, like, isn't it funny, every time Mansell comes past, it sounds like a misfire. Well, it wasn't a misfire, it's the traction control.
Yes, the traction control device apparently works via a maze of electronics on the engine itself, and it effectively cuts out some of the cylinders in the engine, which is what makes the engine sound very rough. But having said that, apparently Patrase's engine sounds rough anyway. But it is difficult at times when the traction control device, which the Ferrari has, and certainly the Williams we know has, is being activated, because what it does is in effect cut out about 2 or possibly 4 of those 10 cylinders on the Renault engine.
Nigel Mansell now going 1:34, and Jean Alesi being 2 seconds slower. So I suppose it is time for Alesi to come into the pits. Well, the team is ready for him. Everybody's ready for Jean Alesi, and Nigel Mansell completing his 56th lap of the day.
When you're racing in these conditions, you have to change your driving approach and style, particularly coming out of low-speed corners. Instead of using something like the permissible 14 or so thousand RPM that Renault give Mansell and Patrese, you may well find they're changing gear something like 11.5 or 12,000. It's called short shifting in the trade. Well, thank goodness. We almost lost it coming into the pit lane. The final, and he nearly got it again. There was a puddle coming in there, and it's very easy to come in too quickly to the pit lane. Well, Alesi has made it in finally, and he's made it in safely. There was amazing megaphone exhaust systems on that V12 Ferrari engine.
Oh, he stole it!
Oh dear, Jean. After all that, after that long looping spin, you kept it going.
And Martin Brundle just passes, so Brundle is now effectively back in 3rd place, not only on the road, but also on the computer. Martin Brundle back in 3rd, and Jean Alesi back to 4th. But in these conditions, and with Jean Alesi, I would say anything can happen.
Well, it should be interesting to compare the times that Alesi does now. He's come in for his wet tyres with what he was doing when he was on slicks, but the conditions are just getting worse and worse. So I suppose in effect any comparison will be totally wasted, since that is the drawback of wet weather racing. You can never make true analogies. Now look at the car coming under braking. He's got a different feel in the car on the wet weather tyre. Very deep groove tyre. Under braking, that tyre doesn't have the same stability that the totally smooth, slick, dry weather tyre has, and that applies even in the wet.
Alesi very spectacular, not only in the dry, but of course also in the wet. Eric Comas has very quietly passed Mika Häkkinen. So it's now the 2 Lotus drivers in 6th and 7th position. Eric Comas makes it 3 Renault engines in the top 5, and Martin Brundle, I think, has effectively passed Jean Alesi because Alesi stalled the engine. And we're waiting for Martin Brundle to pass. Martin being just as quick as
and
Mansell.
Brundle's just gone past now. Confirmed to be in 3rd place, some 41 seconds behind Riccardo Patrese. Jean Alesi a further 20 seconds behind Martin Brundle. And of course that was his first lap, so including coming into the pits almost spinning twice, changing to wets, then stalling the engine and completing a lap. He did that all in 2 minutes and 5 seconds.
That's not bad, is it?
I think it's very good. In the meantime, Riccardo Patrese, again like others now, using the wider line, and you can just see how much rain is falling, the way the light shone through the rain. You could see the weight of the rain we have here now at Manicourt, and the circuit just getting wetter and wetter, and really a very mixed French Grand Prix, really topping off what has been a quite unusual weekend for all the competitors. They got here, barely made it in on Thursday. Some teams still missing fuel, engine, spare parts, engine, monitoring equipment, electronics, and ending up with a race which has been started in the dry, then going wet, then dry, and so on and so forth.
Mansell's lead is now 29 seconds, and The lap times vary quite a lot because you come across slower drivers and back markers. You come across all places. You're on the circuit where you don't really want to be. Martin Brundle doing a 1:35.2, and now we just have to wait for Jean Alesi to see what that man does on his very first flying lap on wets. Well, he's only 2 seconds quicker, which was Martin the lap before, so we could say that Martin might have been held up. Oh, Martin, you can't go around the outside. Nearly got it on the grass, and I suppose it's just as difficult for Brundle to overtake these two than it is for these two to see Brundle.
Well, Martini and Morbidelli are having their own little battle. Are totally oblivious to the fact that Martin Brundle is running behind them. There's so much spray now coming off these two cars. They're not able to see Brundle. Of course, there are marshals around the circuit who should be waving their blue flags very vigorously indeed. But nonetheless, all their concentration is facing forward and not much time being spent looking in the mirrors. Now Morbidelli trying to dive down the inside of Pierluigi Martini. And of course, Martin Brundle being held up by this Italian traffic jam.
Well, I suppose, John, that you can see a blue flag. I could see Martini was seeing a blue flag, but was thinking, I know because Morbidelli's behind me, and Morbidelli was thinking, well, the blue flag's not for me, that's for Martini because I'm behind him.
Yeah, well, put it that way if you like. I still think that it's still the responsibility, in spite of the very difficult conditions, to be aware of what is going on behind you. I know with the intensity of a battle for position, that sometimes isn't always the case.
58 laps have been completed in two parts today. Nigel Mansell leads Riccardo Patrese, Martin Brundle, Jean Alesi, Eric Gomez on course for another points finish after Montreal, and Mika Häkkinen in 6th.
Well, here we see Martin Brundle from another angle getting past Morbidelli. And in fact, Morbidelli and Martini aren't even anywhere near each other on the track. They're just having a little dust up between the boys from Italy.
Well, Eric Gomez has still got to come past. I haven't seen him yet. He's a long, long way behind.
And that little instance with Martini and Morbidelli cost Martin Brundle a cool 6 seconds.
Well, 6 seconds, but he's still in 3rd place. So Martin Brundle, I know he's got that 2nd place in Detroit, but on course for his best result in the Benetton and his best result for years in a Grand Prix car. Mansell leads Riccardo Patrese. We're on lap 60. We've got 10 laps to go here in Magny-Cours. Join us after the break.
Due to Martin Brundle. He was 13 seconds behind him when they last crossed the line, and lapping near sort of 4 or 5 seconds quicker. There's a bit of traffic for him to deal with. And that's Morbidelli. Morbidelli actually moved over and made some room, but it's slippery, especially in the front part of Ladder for Alesi. Now, Brundle's gone through, and we'll see when Alesi goes through. Well, in fact, he lost time to Brundle on that lap. So Brundle's fending off well, and Martin Brundle has in fact responded to the threat from behind and speeded up a bit, and the gap is 14.5 seconds.
Mansell has lapped everybody up to 4th place man Jean Alesi now, and the race order on lap 61 out of 69 as you watch 3rd position man Martin Brundle is Mansell leading Patrese by 31 seconds. Patrese is 45 seconds ahead of Brundle. There he is in 3rd position, and in 4th place, charging hard, is that's Andrea De Cesaris walking in, having I suspect lost the Tyrrell. He had an awful lot of problems in setting the car up to his liking. He started well down on the grid and was well down in the
Eurosport. We're in the latter stages of the French Grand Prix, and they're very wet latter stages, and we've got a charging Jean Alesi after the man you're looking at now, Martin Brundle, currently in 3rd, but being chased by Alesi. Alesi, although, has got to overtake Martin Brundle and then gain another 10 seconds to actually overtake the Benetton driver.
Well, I think it's a very tall order. We've got some 10 laps now of this Grand Prix left. In fact, now less than 10 laps. and the conditions are just deteriorating by the lap. And you could see when we had that overhead shot of Martin Brundle, the volume of water at that part of the circuit was very bad indeed. Well, there, we don't know which, we assume that is Jean Alesi.
It is.
Yes, it is Jean Alesi now coming into the pits.
Alesi retiring from the French Grand Prix.
And he's got a little fire on the back. That's an engine blow up for Jean Alesi. He was certainly giving the engine a lot of stick as he came past us here on the previous lap. And that was a small oil fire on the exhaust, so, and looks like oil in the exhaust. So a very sad end for Jean Alesi. The man never knows when to give up.
Well, I think he's very forced into giving up now, John. Well, that means Mansell leads still. Riccardo Patrese is second and Martin Brundle is third. Mika Häkkinen now moves up to fourth place and Eric Comas will be in fifth. With 7 laps to go and we're on lap 63.
Well, all the press gathering around the Ferrari pits to capture that sad moment. In the meantime, Eric Comas in the Ligier still in 5th place. And really just having to do the very best he can. Vital points for the Ligier team here. 2 more points to add to that one we saw a few weeks ago. And that will give Ligier a total of 3. And Martin Brundle has spun. And that was just coming down, exiting the chicane. Well, no damage to Martin, and of course not under any threat because no one is near him. You see him coming into the chicane. Yeah, and just the back just begins to go and the momentum just drags the tail. Now that's slightly speeded up, but anyway, you got the message. Anyway, Martin kept his foot on the throttle, kept the engine running, and continues in 3rd place.
Well, Martin lost only 2.5 to 3 seconds during that little pirouette, so no damage done. Also because Jean Alesi, of course, just retired out of the race. Both Ferraris out, both McLarens out. There's a lot of people that are not in this race anymore. Eric Comas is now up to 4th place. Mika Häkkinen is 5th. Johnny Herbert 6th. Michele Alboreto 7th. And Gianni Morbidelli is 8th. So, as you said before, John, a lot of people are out of this race, so it's an ideal race to pick up points.
Yes, these are the opportunities for those teams that are not the strong team, not the what would be described as the grandees of Formula One, the McLarens, the Williams, the Benettons, the Ferraris, and for people like Lotus, who've got a super little car, got the ideal engine for a team like Lotus. That's the Ford HB. 2 young, aggressive, ambitious young drivers. And there you are, you see both of them now running in the top 6. Häkkinen 5th, Herbert 6th. And likewise for Ligier, really Ligier ought to be considered a grandee team because the amount of budget they get per annum puts them in that league. It's just that they don't seem to know how to make best use of it.
Martin Brundle crossing the line. Well, he's fast at the moment, but he's 43 seconds behind Riccardo Patrese, so there's no way, unless Riccardo, of course, spins, but if it's very normal, if everything goes according to the book, Mansell, Patrese and Brundle, they're not going to catch each other. Comas and Häkkinen, there's a big gap there. And then Johnny Herbert is behind his teammate about 13 seconds, but I don't think he's going to catch that.
Well, an oil flag out there, and I suspect that's the oil that came out of Jean Alesi's Ferrari, and I suspect, in fact, that's the reason why we saw Martin Brundle spin just over a lap ago. You can see, just looking down from our commentary position, the pit lane with an oil slick. That's the best way to describe it. It's been emulsified with the rain, making some rather attractive colours, but that is the reason why Mansell was very cautious through the chicane, and that was the reason, I believe, why Martin Brundle got caught out. At that particular point, he didn't have an oil flag out to warn him of Alesi's oil.
Johnny Herbert is, for the very first time today, faster than teammate Mika Häkkinen, incidentally, John. All day, Häkkinen was the faster of the two. But now, with 5 laps to go, he sort of relaxes, and Mika is faster than Johnny. Well, we've got 12 cars running here in Magny-Cours. 12 out of 26 starters. I think the main retirements, Ayrton Senna on that very first lap of the first start, and then Michael Schumacher on the very first lap of the second start, John. I mean, that was an amazing happening, I suppose.
Yes, I think Michael Schumacher ought to have learned from the mistake he made in the first part of the French Grand Prix. He chose to go down the left-hand side of the track into the hairpin bend, and he ran over the back of one of the two Jordans. In fact, it was Stefano Modena car. And as brilliant a young driver as Michael is, there's still a lot of learning to be done in this university of Formula One. And it'll still take him maybe another year or maybe even 2 years before he reaches the plateau of greatness of drivers such as Mansell, Senna, Alain Prost, who's currently not a Grand Prix driver, but who, if you believe rumour, has got a form of contract with a British team.
Well, we're not getting into discussions what that team is at the moment. We'll just wait and see, I suppose. But Mansell leads, and he's going to get another 10 points if he keeps going like this, and brings his tally up to 66 points. Teammate Riccardo Patresi's got then 34 points if it stays like this. Eric Gomez in fourth behind Martin Brundle, who will move up and get 4 extra points and gets 9 then. John Alesi doesn't get any points today. Eric Gomez in fourth place will move up to 9th place in the Drivers' Championship, and of course Ligier will move up very rapidly indeed, together with Lotus, because Lotus also has 3 points, but they need 2 drivers for it.
Well, Nigel Mansell now just really counting down the laps to go. He's on the 66th lap. Start the 67th with just 3 laps remaining in this race. And I'm quite sure Nigel really looking forward to seeing that checkered flag getting up on the podium. And we've seen him up there 5 times before in the winner's position. Again, look, running very, very wide, very cautious, and very wisely so. He's got a 40-second lead over Riccardo Patrese, and unless something unforeseen would happen to Mansell, really all he has to do now is just be very prudent over these remaining 3 laps. And he can afford to drive certainly a couple of 3 seconds a lap slower. Any more than that, and I tend to think that the driver concentration can lose its flow. And you've got to be so aware, because every lap on a circuit like this with this amount of water, it is different. On corners where there wasn't the water running across the circuit, now there can be.
John, although they're not running together on the circuit, Mika Häkkinen is 2 seconds a lap faster at the moment than Eric Gomez, and only 3.5 seconds behind. Of course, before the race got stopped, we saw Häkkinen running in front of Gomez, so he doesn't physically have to overtake the Frenchman. But Mika Häkkinen is definitely on the attack to try and wrench that 4th place of the Ligier driver. But what a good result it would be for Gomez if he would finish 4th here in his home Grand Prix.
Yes, and Guy Ligier, I'm sure, will be celebrating if that is the case tonight with his team. And in Eric Gomez, he seems to have found a young driver who has got the potential to carry forward the Ligier team for such a long time now. Ligier have been languishing in the middle and the back of the field. And in fact, you've got to go back to the late 70s, the days of Jacques Lafitte and the late Patrick Depailler, and then of course the late Didier Pironi. Those are the heydays of the Ligier team, and they've never really ever found the combination of car, design and driver to give them that success they enjoyed over a decade ago.
Nigel Mansell completing his 67th lap of the day. And Eric Gomez, let's have a quick look at those lap times, is on the 1:39s. Mika Häkkinen, well, 1:38 is a second and a half, and there's 2 laps to go. So it is possible for Häkkinen, but I suppose also Eric Gomez has heard the news. He's seen his pit, he can see his pit board. Unless he can't go any faster, he will have to.
I think the danger that Gomez faces is that out of the gloom, out of that cloud of spray, will be Mika Häkkinen just bearing down upon him, and he may not be in a position, although he will have the times being shown to him by the pit board, and he can easily have radio contact with the team. You need to actually see where the car is that's going to try and take your 4th place away. The only place that in real terms it's possible will be at the end of the straight, and of course the spray coming up from the Ligier will mask Häkkänen's Lotus completely. So it's a difficult stage in the race for Eric Comas. I think just watching ahead of himself probably is the best recommendation I can give him. And if Häkkinen makes a lunge down the inside at any part of the circuit, he's just got to hope and pray that they don't collide and that Häkkinen might overrun the corner in his efforts to wrestle away 4th place. Look at the oil slick. My goodness, that is appalling. And that comes from the corner the corner they call the water turn, all the way down to the chicane. And it's only now with the rain and that horizontal, that vertical shot down on the circuit, you can see just how difficult the conditions are at that part of the circuit.
Nigel Mansell on lap 69 and last lap of this French Grand Prix. Mika Häkkinen has overtaken Eric Comas. Häkkinen on the 137, Comas doing still the 141s, and of course Mika doesn't physically overtake Eric, but because he was ahead on that first part of the race, and that's the aggregate result, it confuses anybody and everybody, I suppose. But Mika Häkkinen on course for his best Grand Prix result, and also Eric Comas on course for his best Grand Prix finish, but he's got to shake off Johnny Herbert, who's only 4 seconds behind and 5 seconds a lap faster.
Yes, indeed, and that's the point of the race really we would like to be watching. It's great to watch Nigel coming up to take what will be an historic victory for him, a victory that will match that of the great Jackie Stewart. Jackie, of course, retired back in 1973, and he achieved his 27 victories in only 99 Grand Prix, so his victory rate per race very much higher, in fact, than anybody in Grand Prix racing, currently in Grand Prix racing.
Nigel Mansell nearly there. Well, if he's gonna lose victory now, what has the man got to do to win? I suppose he's done very well. I still find it, I hope they're gonna ask him after the race whether Ricciardo let him pass and whether it was team orders.
Well, it's all academic now, because Nigel could switch off the ignition and cruise across, and Mansell has won his 27th Grand Prix. A fantastic achievement for Nigel. Frank Williams, Sheridan Thin and Bradshaw, all members of the Williams team, absolutely delighted with that victory. And look at that, Comas, Häkkinen and Herbert, or what way round was it?
Well, it's Häkkinen, Comas, Herbert now. Johnny 2 seconds behind Eric Comas. Well, you can't win them all, but a very good result for Ligier. Eric Comas, his best Grand Prix result after his first points in Canada. Another 2 here in France. Mika Häkkinen, his best result by far, a 4th place. Johnny Herbert, another point, so 4 points for Team Lotus. And they sort of go up in the Constructors' Championship. They're now 5th, together with Footwork Mugen Honda. And that's 1 result.
Yes, great effort from the Lotus team. Martin Brundle just coming across the start-finish line and stopping. Well, he appeared to be stopping, now he's decided to continue. So I think he just pulled over to acknowledge the waves of his pit crew. So the result is Nigel Mansell first, Riccardo Patrese second, Martin Brundle third. Those are the 3 men we'll see on the podium very shortly, and those are the 3 men we'll have in the press conference probably in about 10 minutes after this race finally concludes. But a great effort from Team Lotus, I must say. The team has worked extremely hard. Peter Collins has taken, personally I believe, enormous risks to ensure that this team can continue racing. And all congratulations to people like Peter Wright, John Miles. Some of the team have been in some of the mechanics, some of the engineers have been in that team since way back in the early 70s. And the team has gone into the deepest of doldrums, but now it's beginning to come out of them. And with the promise of more sponsorship from the British Grand Prix, well, Team Lotus could elevate itself to being the 5th of the top 5 teams before the season is finished.
And of course, Mika Häkkinen and Johnny Herbert driving very well with the car they've been supplied by the team. We saw the last finishers in this Grand Prix, and we're waiting for the championship points now. Well, Nigel Mansell has got 66 points. Riccardo Patrese has got 34 points, so It's not exactly twice as many points he did have before. Michael Schumacher still got 26, and look at the oil.
I mean, there must have been gallons of oil poured out of that Ferrari oil tank.
How much oil is there in the Ferrari
there's
engine?
probably about 1.5 gallons in total. The oil tanks are not that large, but I think every last drop of oil must have come out of that tank, because from a couple of 100 meters before this chicane, all the way through the chicane into the pit lane. Now I understand why Jean Alesi almost spun in the pit lane. He almost spun on a combination of the water and his own oil. But looking down on it vertically, that entire pit lane and way beyond it, completely saturated.
Well, you can actually see it right out of the window now. Waiting for Riccardo Patrese. The man has got 34 points. Michael Schumacher has got 26. Berger and Senna still have 18 points. Martin Brundle's got 10 now, but he's still behind Jean Alesi, who's stuck on 11. But he's overtaken Michele Alboreto. Andrea de Cesaris has got 4 points. And here we see the points in vision. And Mika Häkkinen has got... I think Mika's got more than 4 points. No, he's got 4 points. Andrea de Cesaris 4, Wendlinger 3, and Bertrand Gachot 1 point from Monaco. And we're waiting for the constructors' points, which should come up any second. But a massive lead for the Williams team. They had 84 points, so they now should have 100 points. And the team that's second at the moment is McLaren Honda. They've got 36, Benetton 35, Ferrari 13, Lotus 6, and Footwork Mugen Honda has got 5 points in 6th place. Well, what a wonderful little engine that HB engine is for a smallish team. In 5th place, Lotus.
Yes, I had a word with Eddie Jordan the other day and talked to him about the merits of that Ford HB engine, which the Jordan team had a most wonderful first season in Formula 1 racing with. They ended up in 5th place in the Constructors' Championship with that engine. Of course, now with the Yamaha V12, they've moved on to a much more complicated engine, an engine which ultimately has got more potential, but right now, of course, has been proving not to be either as competitive or reliable as that Ford HB of last year. And for a team like Lotus, or any, as I would describe, mid-sized team or even small team, if you can get your hands on that Ford HB engine, ultimately it will put you in the results, and ultimately you will gain sponsorship. So it's an equation, it's a very difficult situation for a team to know whether to go with a manufacturing engine like Yamaha, for example, or to bite the bullet and have to pay for a Ford HB. And that's what Lotus are doing. They're having to pay for that engine, but by paying for it, they're getting the results. So the equation, a very fine one indeed, for those teams outside of those top 4 teams that we've been talking about earlier.
See you, Luke. Thank you.
The top 3 on the rostrum here in Magny-Cours: Nigel Mansell, Riccardo Patrese, and I think a relieved Martin Brundle.
I think a very pleased Martin Brundle, as much as relieved. It's good to see Martin on the podium. It was a very difficult start for him in the Benetton team, and Jean-Marie Balest planting 2 big smackers on each of Nigel's cheeks. I'm sure he enjoyed that, but that is a Gallic gesture and there's no intention other than that of congratulations, Nigel. Fantastic job to win the French Grand Prix, of course, one of the most historic Grand Prix in the history of Formula 1. Well, 27 victories for Nigel Mansell, and what a happy man he is.
We're going to take a short break here on Eurosport while Mansell and the rest gets to the interview room, and we'll see him there after this short break.
73e Grand Prix de sa carrière. Il a acquis sa 27e victoire en Grand Prix, 24e pole position également, et puis 26e meilleur tour en course. Il compte maintenant 427 points dans sa carrière au championnat du monde, alors que Gilles Pernet est avec Eric Comas. Eric Comas qui va peut-être nous expliquer ce qui s'est passé dans ce dernier tour.
Absolument, je suis donc avec Eric et vous avez entendu ce que demandait Jean-Louis Moncet. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé exactement dans le dernier tour?
Je ne sais pas si c'est une alerte d'essence, mais le moteur a donné des signes de coupure sur les 2 derniers tours et j'ai perdu de précieuses secondes, d'autant plus que la voiture avait un comportement très brutal puisque la puissance arrivait tout d'un coup. Donc j'étais obligé de vraiment réduire la cadence dans les virages et de mettre à fond dans les lignes droites, mais j'ai perdu beaucoup de puissance sur les 2 derniers tours.
Merci Eric Comas, merci à tous, merci à Gérard Van der Gut et à Georges Geoffrey, nos réalisateurs, à vous Alain Prost et Pierre Van Vliet, et vous aussi Roger Isabelle. Rendez-vous maintenant dans une semaine à Silverstone pour le Grand Prix de Grande-Bretagne.
Magny-Cours for the last time. What are we waiting for? Nigel Mansell, Martin Brundle and Riccardo Patrese to go to the interview rooms, and we have a little chat with them. Well, the top 3, I think nothing spectacular in there. As you said, John, just in the break now, Michael Schumacher having that shunt with Stefano Modena. Michael still in 3rd place in the World Championship standings, but well, was it necessary, you think? Well, he's got to try, I suppose.
Yes, anybody has to try in a racing car. That's what you're there to do. You are a racing driver and you're there to try and win the race. But by winning the race, you've also got to finish the race. And that sounds rather simplistic, but it is the case. And in the case of Michael Schumacher in the first part of the Grand Prix, he was very anxious indeed. And I can understand why he was, because he knew that the Honda engine in the McLaren had the advantage on the straight. Well, here we are in the media room with Mansell, Patrese and Martin Brundle, and in a few seconds we'll probably hear the scenarios of the first part of the race. Was Riccardo racing you, or was it sort of just a little bit of friendly teamwork between the two of you? Nigel looking very, very relaxed. Difficult race from a concentration point of view, probably not quite so difficult from the physical part.
Martin Brundle on the right for the first time here, actually.
Nigel Mansell, congratulations, your 6th win of the